Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Today's guest is another RPG luminary, a reviewer of OSR materials of sorts. This is Mr. Prince of Nothing. He has the Age of Dusk blog where you can find all his various eviscerations of the dross of the various OSR adventures that are plaguing the internet, as well as his own thoughts on what makes a good adventure and his own examples of such, as he has also published two of his own, The Palace of Unquiet Repose, and what was the other one, the previous one before that?
That's Red Prophet Rises. I
Red
was a
Prophet
co-author
Rises.
there.
Yeah, there we
Worked
go.
together with my
Name
editor
escaped me
there.
for a moment there.
For sure.
Prince of Nothing, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Well, I've been reading your blog and your reviews for quite some time now, and yeah, you've definitely established yourself as a reviewer, and two, as a pretty damn good writer. Your stuff is very well written and entertaining to read.
Well, thank you. All it takes is 10,000 hours and you
Well,
too
yeah.
can become an RPG reviewer.
Well, as someone who does it, at least in part on this channel, I do, I
Mhm.
review for RPG stuff as well. It's all the other stuff I cover. But yeah, it takes time to get good at this stuff, just like everything else. You can't really just, go into something and expect you'd put out your best work until you've actually got the practice in.
Um, yeah, uh, I've been going back and forth on this with my readers and also other people, and like my conclusion is basically that the what you want to achieve as a reviewer, as a sort of like minimum a benchmark, is that you're consistent enough so that people can read your review, and even if they don't necessarily have the same taste, they can use you as a sort of like coordinate or a compass point to figure out whether or not they would like something.
Yeah, like even if someone is completely the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of their taste and stuff, or someone just has bad taste in general, you can usually, if they're consistent enough in that, you can use them as a benchmark at least for that.
Yeah, I get that too. Not the bad taste, of course, but I do
No,
get the like obviously I disagree with you, but I think that you make some valid points for that sort of stuff. Yeah, of course.
yeah, because honestly, there are certain people, well, no names, of course, but there are certain people whose tastes are just so kind of like all over the place that it becomes very difficult to see, okay, what do you actually like? I would like to know
Um.
exactly what are you basing your review on?
Oh yeah. There's. I guess I would give us uh you know again, one of my readers gave me a tip, and it was like one of the best tips ever, which is that like as soon as you kind of find your flow, you cover like all of the at least in the OSR, right? You cover all of the classics, and in that way, a new reader can just see what your takes on these very familiar modules,
Mhm.
and then use that again to sort of like establish like, okay, this is what this guy is about. This is where he's coming from, and then all the other stuff that'll be more obscure. Well, he'll have a way to sort of like interpret that properly.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, especially in terms of the OSR, since so much of it goes back to those original works, like the original BX, original AD&D, OD&D, if you really, really want to go a proper grognard, of course, and
Oh yeah.
then extrapolates from there in their own directions based on whatever system they happen to be going in. Sorry, coughing went down the
No
wrong hallway
problem.
for a second. So really, in that case, I think it makes sense in that case to really focus a lot on OSR materials in that case, in that way, since that is very much ideal for that kind like type of review philosophy.
Uh, I guess, although there are definitely people that disagree, I'm sure we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Uh, no, to me, it really only makes sense to look at the OSR as sort of like an extension or a continuation of like a tradition of old school gaming that again started with OD&D and probably ended somewhere near what I'm going to place the cutoff point at something like 1985, maybe the late stages of like for AD&D first edition,
Mhm.
and with maybe like tiny holdovers carried over into a second edition. But really, by that time,
Yeah.
it was mostly gone. It was not
I
it was a
can
change
definitely
of
see a
ethos.
cutoff. Yeah, I can definitely see the cutoff point like at latest third edition, because at that point you've gotten a complete system change with enough, well, maybe not complete system change, but enough of a change that, well, quite frankly, you're practically playing two different games at that point.
It's it is no more compatible. Sorry, the sort of continuity is disrupted in a more fundamental way than with second edition. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are. It is often underestimated how much of sort of third edition was kind of like quietly tested in the late stages of second edition. You can see a lot
Mm-hmm.
of what is it, the skills and tactics manuals where they practiced with codifying a lot of things that did exist but
Which
had
would
no
end up
structure.
becoming
Like
feats in the third edition as such.
yeah. Attacks of opportunity, spacing, this sort of grid-based combat. I think there's a what is it, a module, Gates of Firestorm Peak, that really goes heavily into that sort of stuff. But yeah, I guess you're right. With second edition, it's still mechanically compatible, but you can tell sort of the ethos has changed.
Definitely, yeah. In
It no
terms of
longer
the
became about
GM advice and stuff like that, and the emphasis on certain aspects, like emphasis more on narrative and story as opposed to the actual, game, and that was a bit more in the first edition of AD&D.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, more about telling a story, getting immersed, and you can tell it has an immediate effect as well because like as soon as that component of challenging the player, not necessarily the character,
Mm-hmm.
is I guess it doesn't really disappear entirely in all but a few very dire cases, but it is deprioritized, and as a result you see a lot of like I guess dungeon designing principles. They just get they basically get in the way of telling the story, right?
Yeah. I mean, if your character can die at first level, it's kind of hard to tell this, grand narrative about them if they're already gone.
That was that was another one.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, unless of course you want your grand narrative to be like, yeah, don't go in the dungeon, you're gonna die.
Well, there's I'm trying to recall who said it first, but I think there were people that said like basically, well, there is a story even to this old school D&D, but it is something that you create maybe retroactively. There
Yeah,
should not be a predefined narrative
exactly. Yeah.
that your characters act out. Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have like, the narrative beats of a novel or a comic book or a movie because it's a different medium with its own narrative conventions. In this case, more something that's, as you say, in retrospect or emergent rather than
Emergent. Yeah.
predetermined, at least ideally in any case.
I would say so. It can definitely have like I guess thematic elements. It can
Mm-hmm.
even have atmosphere. I'm totally on board with that. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah, the most important thing should still be for it to be a game that
Yeah.
it's in the title, role playing game or fantasy adventure game, right?
Yeah. I mean, atmosphere is not only, important for setting mood and, giving the right kind of tone, it's also tactically important. If you're going into a dark, and, dismal room with, very little sound and just the sound of dripping water, coming down from the flagstones, that's big difference in terms of like you enter a 10 by 10 corridor.
That's true, right?
Yeah.
I get
It's
what you're
like
saying.
one is going to give you bonuses to stealth, and you have to, be careful where you're putting your feet because the noises you make are going to spread out because, there's not much other noise happening. The other one is just, a graph paper map, and there's nothing else to it. So,
Yeah, I would agree with that, but let's say even if it doesn't have any sort of like mechanical differentiation, in my experience, it can still be a good thing to dress up the dungeon a little bit. As you said before, nobody likes, I guess, or at least not a lot of people like just exploring this barren labyrinth and
yeah, it has a
going
sense of,
too hard, yeah, into
yeah, it
the
gives
into
it
the
a sense of
gameplay.
artificiality, not, which, can be useful in certain ways. Like if you're going into a dungeon that feels artificial and stuff like that, it's like, whoa, what's going on here? But in that case, it's a deliberate aesthetic choice, even then, which is its own form of atmosphere.
Yeah, I think um, what happens is, or at least what happens very often is that people they go to these extremes, right? So it's
Mhm.
like, well, you either have railroading and a story or something, or you have like pure gameplay, but it is I do think that most people experience D&D, you know, on these multiple levels. So immersion and atmosphere and all that stuff, it is important. It's just that it shouldn't be prioritized over everything else. I
Yeah, it's
think
not the
that's
be
where
all end all.
2E started. Yeah, basically. Yeah,
Mhm.
I would say so.
Yeah. And I think that goes into the way you do your own work here. I'm looking at your reviewing standards. Really good on you to actually have written reviewing standards for your stuff, which is, not everybody does that. And it actually goes into, okay, these are the things I really like. Here are things I don't like. Here are things I'm going to dock you on. Here are things I'm going to give you extra points on if you do it well. And, that is honestly admirable. It's one of the things I like about RPGs. I like thoroughness and comprehensiveness. I like the same thing done for review standards as well. So kudos on that.
Thank you. I should say my review standards, I should probably update that. So maybe ding one. Let's go from a 9 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10. But no, I do think it's good to have a few to sort of like benchmarks and to give a few examples of just like the stuff that you consider to be excellent.
Mhm.
You know, on the other hand, there I think people can get too bogged down in standards. It should not be a purely mechanical exercise. So
Yeah.
sometimes you get something that's, on paper, it might not meet exactly the characteristics that you're usually looking for, but it just executes whatever mutant freak show thing it wants to do with just such
Well, yeah.
verve that you're convinced, right? You're like, okay, this would be fun. I
Yeah.
get it. Yeah.
Well, it's very much you have to judge things based on what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
In the sense that, okay, this may not be my thing, but what it's doing, it does very well. So this is good for the people who want it. If something
That's true.
is, yeah, if something's being made that just is not fit for its own purpose, then that one is getting a bad review right there.
That would be the first sort of like the first and most obvious form of failure. I would argue that in some cases you can look at, like, say, the context in which it exists, right?
Mhm.
Like if you let's say you write the world's most moving heartbreaking railroads. That's like if you play it, players literally break down crying. There's a 64-page booklet with with character background that the players can study before they start the module.
Yeah.
Right? On the one hand, like, this might be exactly what some people are into, but if you publish that in D&D, I think I will say, what the
Yeah.
hell is this doing here? Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So
it's like
there's a
this
certain
should
sort
be
of
in
like,
this should be in
yeah,
the fiction section of the fantasy fiction section at Barnes and Nobles, not in the D&D section.
or in indie gaming, or yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that there's something to be said for being able to identify when something, I guess, doesn't really make sense against the backdrop of what has gone before.
Yeah.
But as you said, it can still have admirable qualities for sure.
Oh, of course. Like I do a lot of video game reviews and stuff like that too. So anything that's a sequel or advertises itself as a spiritual sequel to something else,
Yeah,
it's going to get compared to that. If it's a remake of something, it's getting compared to that. I don't care if you say, oh, it has to stand on its own. Bitch, you're using other things name in your marketing. You're getting compared to it, whether you
that's
like it or not.
that was the problem with what was it called again? I think Torment, Tides of Numenera.
Numenera.
Yeah, I
Yeah, it
couldn't get
wasn't no
through it.
Planescape.
No.
That, to be honest, I didn't particularly like the Numenera system very much.
Cipher.
Cipher system.
Yeah, no comments. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
just
didn't really like it either.
it's just wasn't to my taste, to be perfectly honest. When I played a little bit of it, the tabletop version of it,
Yeah.
it just felt kind of like fidgety. It's been a long time since I played it, so it's not exactly fresh in my memory. But I did find myself like, okay, this is just awkward in certain ways that I'm not quite sure about. I have to play more in order to understand properly, but I don't feel like.
I think fidgety with three different pools of resources that
Mhm.
you're juggling, and you can feed that back into your skill rolls and everything, is probably not a uncharitable description, I think.
Well, at least I remembered enough of it. I played like, a bit of it for a while and then just like dropped it. So
For
it
sure.
wasn't exactly a long-term obsession of mine, like other systems that, go on about all the time, these days. So, speaking of systems, how did you get into this whole RPG malarkey back in the day?
Oh, right. Back in the day, uh, I started playing in high school. I think first or second year, or whatever the Dutch equivalent of high school is. Right after I'd originally been exposed to Dungeons and Dragons via Baldur's Gate,
Mhm.
we didn't really have anyone to teach us. So we at some point we went to the Gamekeeper store in Amsterdam, and we picked up a DMG and a PHB.
Nice.
And I don't remember how we got the monster manual exactly because it was out of print, but we obtained one. And yeah, we just got started, and we started playing.
Yeah, just muddle along till you got good at it.
Basically, yeah.
I think that's the case for all of us. I think my first encounter with D&D was a friend in the big messy pile of stuff he had in his room had the second edition AD&D Player's Handbook. The one, that has the guy on the horse with the winged helmet just riding into the foreground.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah. He didn't have any of the other books. Just that.
Just the PHB.
Just the
Oh,
PHP.
well, there you go.
Just somehow randomly got it. And I was like, hey, what's this? Cool. I
Yeah,
think,
you just try stuff out. Yeah, for sure.
exactly.
That's how we got started as well. I do think probably if you just get into this hobby, it does really help, particularly with some of the older systems. And I'm not talking about like something like BX, which was made to be intelligible to
It's literally
the young.
basic expert.
Yes,
So
for as a teaching tool for kids. Yeah,
yeah.
but and I'd say AD&D is very sort of um it's not as crunchy as a little bit of context. I did switch to AD&D.
Mhm.
I've been playing it for a while now. For a while now. My high level adventure, by the way, will soon come out.
Ooh,
Um,
nice.
but uh, right, it is very dense. The way it's organized, you'll have critical information buried in some appendix that you'll never touch for
Yeah,
a
if there's
million
one
years.
thing that the OSR really did really good at the start, especially when they're just bringing these out of print games back in a form that could be, used these days, was changing up the presentation to make them a bit more intelligible and, less esoteric, I guess, just in terms of the layout and stuff in many ways.
I I agree with you, but I would also say that the one singular case when this was actually necessary would have been Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and because of
Mm.
I believe it was copyright related, they were still not sure whether or not how litigious Wizards was going to be towards this concept of retro clones.
They hadn't really
They
gotten to they send the Pinkertons after people at that point.
No, but like the TSR, you no doubt you're familiar. They
Oh
used to
yeah.
be like notoriously litigious,
Mm.
right? So this was all everybody was kind of threading on eggshells. So Osric, the one retro clone for AD&D, isn't quite a perfect, more intelligible copy, the copy that the world needs. But then again, with AD&D, there's a certain degree of interpretation with a lot of the writing. So if you're going to make a cleaned up, unambiguous version, you'll immediately create just a ton of scub and
Oh
people
yeah.
people yelling and arguing that this sentence actually means something different, or that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we get that even with non-ambiguous rules. So,
Oh yeah,
it's
of
like
course.
this rule means this. No, this rule means this. That's a house rule. No, you're a house rule. Gentlemen, neither of you have ever read the book.
That's also accurate. Yeah.
That is something
But
I see too much of, quite frankly. I mean, we're seeing a bit of a resurgence in certain quarters of actually looking at the books and playing the rules as written, at least at first, just to actually say whether or not the book actually works or the rules are actually fit to purpose. Because that is something I've seen way too much of for far too long. People who house rule games before even playing them. That is a pet peeve of mine.
I think you found your your drinking buddy. No, I hate that
Oh.
too. Well, so yeah, here you go. No, the I'm currently working through. I think it's Phaeton. It's one of the earlier actually good signs
Mhm.
of the OSR, and what you see in Phaeton is kind of like what started this trend of this was in an era when there was like a lot of the mainstream D&D was very overly codified, mechanically complex, again
Mhm.
unambiguous, but also very cumbersome and restrictive. So they kind of went back to this more open-ended, free form of the game,
Yeah.
right? Of like OD&D. And well, the impression I keep getting is that if you take that mindset and you have that applied by a person who's been playing old school D&D for 10 years, right? Then it's great, right? Then they can kind of like afford to trim some of the chaff, basically, and they can do great things. But if you take that mindset and you're just getting started, it's what you'll come up with is it's like stupid. it'll be it'll be something that like 50 people before you have come up with, and it's I in general it is definitely my position. That's why I got started with this whole no art punk adventure design competition.
Mm,
uh, in general, I think unless you're one of these +2 or +3 standard deviation geniuses, right? That probably actually trying out the game will increase your insight and will
yeah.
allow you to apply your creativity a lot better
Yeah. The box is for you. You need to stay inside the box
for a while, for
for a
sure.
while at least. You will eventually be able to leave the box or create an even bigger box that, more suits your level of creativity and your needs. But the training wheels are there for a reason. So you don't,
Yeah.
break your skull against something because you're not wearing a helmet.
Well, you can also ask yourself, like, if you take a game and you immediately change it, what does that say about, I guess, the quality of the material you're getting into,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Like that you don't care, you immediately start changing it.
It's like you're not
But
there for the game itself. You're there for something else. Like maybe
I
you're there for socializing with other people, or maybe you just enjoy rolling dice at stuff. But you're not there for the actual to play the actual game that you're playing at the moment because you keep changing it until it's unrecognizable.
I think people who do that, a part of it is harmless, right? Because
Mm,
it's totally normal that when you're playing a game that you're curious. Definitely, if you're a little bit younger, right, that you want to experiment, you want to
oh, of
see how
course.
how things work out, and of course, right, like you want to prove that you're creative. So like part of it is definitely harmless.
Mm,
Um, I do genuinely think that if you zoom out a little bit and you go to well, I hesitate to use the term professional in the OSR, but let's go if you go to a publication level, right?
yeah.
There are definitely people that put out stuff where their primary motivation is, or it seems to me at least, definitely doesn't appear to be to make something that would be useful to a fan of the game. It's more that the game serves as a sort of um, a vessel, I guess, or a vehicle for their creative expression. So it's reversed again.
Yeah.
You sure your creative expression should be expressed through like the language of D&D, and here it's not so much.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're young and you're just starting out, obviously even the rules a fairly simple rule set, you can forget stuff and insert your own rulings instead, and that can balloon out obviously.
For
But
sure.
that is just that's one of the reasons why I always wondered why people don't just have the books open at the table when they're starting out. And yeah, it's going to take a little time to reference things and look at things, but
I This is well, I think it's when you run a game, one of the most important, I guess, things to keep track of is that you keep it moving. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's acceptable if you forget a rule and it takes you more than 5 seconds to look it up, to make a temporary ruling and then continue. But
yeah,
then the idea is that after the session is over, you look it up, what the actual answer would have been,
exactly.
and you continue. Right? That's okay with me. But in general, yeah, you should probably make a good faith effort to try to play the game.
Yeah.
And it gets, I guess, that's with this emerging movement of playing games more rules as written. You get a sort of ridiculous overcorrection where people, whatever, you forget one minor rule somewhere, you don't apply it, and then
Yeah,
immediately
I
like,
think
oh,
they,
whatever,
yeah.
yeah, but,
I mean, in many
that's
ways, the OSR itself is a reverse correction from third edition, fourth edition D&D from that point, since that's what was the major context in terms of the rule sets that
yes,
it's reacting against, and in many ways, the way the OSR went to go like super rules light, you know, player challenge versus character challenge, the going very much with GM interpretation as opposed to firmly established rule set is very much a bit of that overcorrection also in the complete opposite direction of what was then a more crunchy rules is rules set in stone kind of way of doing things for D&D at the time.
I would say so. I will say that in my opinion, part of the I don't really even consider it the OSR anymore, to be honest,
Yeah.
because to me the OSR is like about old school Dungeons and Dragons, right? And maybe you play what is it, Arduin or Tecumel or something like that. And obviously, I'm not going to kick you out of the clubhouse, but it's reached a point where it's ridiculous, right? There's barely any resemblance anymore to the original game, and
calling your game OSR doesn't mean anything anymore to a certain degree.
I agree. Yeah, that's one of the other problems, right?
Yeah.
So
hence, you got new tags coming out, new SR, or
that's fine.
all sorts of stuff. Yeah, well, that one.
I support the use of a different tag. That way, I know. Oh, I can just go around this. Right? I won't be disappointed. That's the best thing. So many problems are caused by, I guess, sort of deception or distortion. People trying to be something that they're actually not into, or
Yeah, and then people. Oh, I want to play this because it's the popular thing.
Right.
But it's not really my thing, but I'm just gonna kind of like try to put my square peg into this round hole and see if it can make it work. But
I think that's an accurate description of what has actually happened to the OSR with the NSR. These are sort of staffed by you don't really have a lot of old schoolers in those quarters. It's mostly people that either got in via probably Lamentations of the Flame Princess at the earliest, or even just like indie gaming. And now, because of I believe there's an article. It's called 5 Geek Social Fallacies. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No, I've heard of it, yeah.
Right. So one of these fallacies is that the idea of like the concept of like ostracizers are evil. We play with a big tent. Everybody is welcome. We should all, we all enjoy D&D
we
in
all
our
just
own way.
Get along.
Yeah, we all hold hands. So
kumbaya,
that's
bitches.
great. But now the result is that like if you go to let's say you're completely lost. You have no personal standards, so you go to Reddit, right? You go to Reddit OSR, and you don't even know where to begin. These people are these are all like basically different hobbies, and they're held together by a sort of connective tissue that is BX, and then barely.
Yeah, if that. I mean, if you house roll BX to the point that it's no longer recognizable as such, you're not even playing in the same ballpark anymore, much less the same sport.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess there can definitely be value in having people. And this is another thing I run into, right? Like you see these rules lights come out by people that have been have been in the hobby for like 3 months. Hey guys, I made my own rules light. That's like usually it's worthless. Anybody can do that. But to me, coming up with your own variant of like D&D, right? Like Tecumel is a good example by M.A.R. Parker. It can be completely awesome, but the bar would be pretty high because you're basically making a sort of you're basically saying like, well, everybody plays this great game of Dungeons and Dragons, but instead you can play my game, right? Which is just as good, or at least just as good for one session. Try it out, right?
Basically, you can still play D&D, but what if you were playing D&D with a new hat?
Yeah, with in my D&D we have a silver standard, and I removed all the spells above level 3 because I don't like them. Yeah, whatever.
You're basically just pay like you're being asked to pay for someone's house rules at that point.
Yeah, and I think again something like that could work if you would also let's say you would totally overhaul all of the there was another term that was used, like Gygaxian building blocks, which basically refers to monsters, spells, magic items, that sort of stuff. If you would totally overhaul that, or 85% overhaul that, and then also change up the rules, like okay, of course, right?
Well,
obviously people like novelty.
It's one of the reasons why I like Adventure Conqueror King so much, that system, because it literally did that. It started out as BX but it
I think
has
it's
expanded
RC.
so far beyond that in terms of comprehensiveness of the rule set, and in terms of just, unlike, it's got the complexity, obviously, but it's fractal in the sense that it starts out simple. You can just, you don't have to, undergo a full, PhD in the rule set until you actually need them for something. But more importantly, is that the rules actually work. I don't need to house rule anything for this system, which is incredible, quite frankly.
I think
The closest,
X is
yeah, the
a
closest thing I have to do is just like if I want to do something setting specific, then okay, then I can create new classes and stuff like that for that, or create a new spell magic type that can fit in. But I've got the rules for that too, and it fits and it works, and I don't need to worry about, okay, like in third edition, where oftentimes if you changed out something extensively, you could have knock-on effects throughout the rest of the system that could cause chaos.
regression. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of
Uh,
the major problems with third edition, quite frankly.
oh yeah. No, I've also played it, and it was
Yeah.
also for some DMs. Again, I didn't really have a problem with it when we played it, but for some DMs, it could even be very stressful because if you made a house ruling, then there were basically all of these builds that get invalidated or people would
Yeah,
start
yeah, yeah.
shrieking. But yeah, no, I've played ACKS for I think 2.5 years.
Mhm.
I believe it originally started as not BX but BECME or Rule Cyclopedia. I
Well,
think.
not really. It started out as BX, but it definitely has some influence from Rule Cyclopedia, kind of that level of, extensive, well, that focus on verisimilitude and the focus on, covering as many situations that are going to happen in this kind of adventure as possible. Or, really gravitating towards that more simulationist aspect that Rule Cyclopedia and that kind of level of rule set really covers.
Um, Sure. It's the thing I noticed mostly was just I think the skill system is one of the things where I was like
Mm.
I recognize that. But regardless, no, we played Axe for a while and we didn't really get to do any of the main stuff. I think
Mm.
I had two characters, a 6th level wizard and an 8th level fighter, right?
Yeah.
But it did run like clockwork. I think Axe. Well, the reason it's one of the few retro clones that I do respect is because it genuinely went into an area that D&D had not really explored in such detail before.
Mhm.
Although I'm sure that there's some sort of 2E box set like
Oh
Birthright or
yeah, there's
something that
definitely some, yeah, well,
right.
Birthright, obviously, but I think
Yeah,
also as D&D has gone on, it's gotten less and less interested in that, grand scale domain
yeah,
level stuff, where instead all your power is personal. Your
right.
character just gets more powerful as it go along. So it's
Which
like,
is a little silly. Yeah,
yeah, well, it basically just means that you're always doing the same thing in the sense that at low level you're fighting goblins, at high level you're fighting demons. Whereas at here for a game like Axe, at low level, sure, you're fighting goblins. At high level, you're fighting an army of goblins with your own army behind you, and you are just, raising the battle standard as you rage and defend your own country that you conquered yourself, you and your buddies, and you're now just, laying waste to the armies of darkness with, the evil sorcerer at the other end. That is metal as fuck.
I do like it. Yeah,
And
the
you can still have the demons there too, even if you want.
if you use the Axe Advanced companion to port them back in, that's right. Yeah. Now, I guess the one thing where Axe is a little bit more influenced by later editions is that I do think it is more comprehensive in a way than even AD&D, right?
Mm,
With Axe, you have less ambiguity, I find. Like with AD&D, it's they give you a very expansive core, but there's still like a ton of corner cases, and they just kind of expect you as a DM to
yeah.
make those calls, and you have to be comfortable with that. Whereas with Axe, it is you get a whole complete system that you can just plonk down, and if you're willing to I guess hit the books, then
Yeah.
everything is already done for you. Macros has done the math. Yeah,
Yeah, well, that's definitely one of the reasons I like it so much. Is that you can just
for sure.
plunk it down, and okay, this is going to work. My understanding of it may be subpar for now because I haven't looked at everything or don't remember everything, but that would be the case anyway with AD&D as well, plus ambiguity. So I've got that one problem.
You
I understand a
you
lot of
gotta
people
be okay with
enjoy.
that.
Yeah,
That's all right.
that's the
Like
thing.
the AD&D expects you to go like,
I know.
yeah, whatever.
I
You
think,
find the answer.
yeah,
That's all
I
right.
think when it comes to those kinds of levels of ambiguity, I prefer that for more rules light systems
Mhm.
because then the channels to move around in are a little bit wider as opposed to something like AD&D, which has a lot of systems already, but also has ambiguity. I think that's my main area of difference in that regard is that like if I'm playing something like Barbarians of Lemuria, another system that I like quite a bit, that one
Right.
is very rules light, but the systems cover enough of what you're doing in game, and it's very genre focused, so it's very much like the kinds of things you do in a sword and sorcery adventure. This covers that very well in
Right.
terms of like swinging by blades against bad guys and casting magic and seducing fair maidens and stuff like that, all that good stuff, versus something that is far more mechanically complex. For that, I prefer something with a lot less ambiguity, simply
You want
because
less
of
latitude.
complexity.
Well, I think
But then again, that is a personal preference. In that case, your
no,
preference may
by all
vary.
means. Let me steelman it or steelman my own argument, I guess. No, like what I like about it is um you have a comprehensive framework, right, with a lot of depth already in the rules, but it doesn't it sort of accepts that a good role-playing game is, you can't cover every single eventuality,
Mhm.
right? So it's sort of like gives you the it sort of accepts its own limitations, and
Mhm.
in these corner cases that don't occur very often, but they will at some point occur, right?
Yeah.
uh they expect you to make a call. That's fine.
Yeah. I guess the important thing there is to remember which call you made and apply that consistently going
Yes.
forward.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Mm. That is something I think the rulings not rules aspect of the OSR kind of fucked a little bit over time. At least the interpretation most people made of it, where it's like, oh, you don't need the rules. You just need the GM to make rulings. No, no, no. The rulings are rules. You're just making them as you go along.
Yeah.
So make them good.
This is another example of, there was a term for it. I think it's called divarication. It's just a
Mhm.
sort of information loss. This rulings not rules, and I think it's described in uh, Matt
The
Matt's
the
primer.
OSR
Yeah.
primer, yeah.
Yeah,
Matt
Matt Finch's
Finch's
old school
OSR
primer.
primer.
That's the one. Yeah, for sure. Right. This was written in a context of like third edition, right? Of
Hmm.
this super comprehensive, ironclad, almost like machine code game that covers every single interaction, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, then you would have more rulings, but then people, they take it to this ludicrous extreme where you get rid of all the rules, and the the assumption or the idea is usually that as the DM, you can sort of provide for the same amount of like granularity and depth, or maybe you hate the depth. That's also possible, but
Hmm.
you can do that like with rulings. But that's very often not the case.
Yeah.
You can't.
Like, there's only a certain amount of mental bandwidth you can apply to this stuff when you're also dealing with a couple of other people around the table. The cat is
Oh,
meowing in the other room, and
so do you know what FKR is? So a free
FKR.
Kriegspiel.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
sounds very German, but it's
Well,
this
very
basically
Prussian, very,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
basically the idea is in military academies and such, they would have rules Kriegspiel, which Kriegspiel means war game, basically.
Yes.
Literally, it's
Yes.
a war game. Rules Kriegspiel is, basically what we would have with like, 40K or something like that, where you have specific rules and stuff like that for
A war
everything.
game, for
It's a
sure.
war game standard. Free
Yes.
Kriegspiel is far more loose in that regard. You have a referee who is there to make rulings of everything. And basically it's far more open in terms of what the individual generals, in this case the players would be, are capable of doing with their actual wars.
Exactly. There's, I believe, virtually no rules. Maybe
Mhm.
no rules, actually. It's all individual judgment. Now, I can imagine in Dungeons and Dragons, if you are some sort of if you are, the YouTuber Scalagrim or some other sort of like deranged HEMA fanatic, that you can probably with just rulings, you could probably apply just an infinite amount of depth to like the hand-to-hand combat, and you know
Yeah.
so much about skirmishes that that's all fine, and you know exactly all the nuances. But when you're not Scalagrim, when you're not that one guy, you know, you really should just like have a set of like rules because you're going to want to figure out a way to tackle all of these things consistently. And that's
Mhm.
also what your players should also have. I guess they should have the ability to assess risk properly when they try something to
Yeah.
approximate, not perfectly, but they should have some general idea of how effective something is.
Yeah. Because otherwise, you can't make educated, decisions based on the information that your character has. Not you as
Right.
a player necessarily, but you as the character in that world. What information do they have? What do they know? How do they react to that? And how would they, be able to parse the difficulty and the general risk of any action that they're about to undertake?
Basically, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Another thing about those rules that related is it allows you to play people you're not. Like that the Scalagrim that we just mentioned, who's yeah, he knows his stuff with sword and stuff. What if he's playing a character who doesn't?
Um,
Like, what if he's playing a squishy wizard who's never picked a sword in his life? How do
yeah,
you,
I guess, or just what if you asked him, you know, when you're running, when you're going to, I'm going to free Kriegspiel, some sort of the Dungeons and Dragons, but I don't really know a lot about medieval combat. Could you write down approximately what the effect of all of this stuff would be? And then he would write it down, and you would have a set of rules.
yeah.
Right?
And
That's
then you
basically it.
bring in a
Yeah,
dragon.
exactly.
Okay,
Right.
all of a sudden, all that stuff. You're now fighting something that never existed, and we don't have real life examples of that, really.
Right.
Okay, how did people fight giant animals back in the day and add flamethrowers? Okay, and it can fly. Fuck. Okay, we're gonna have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, or you know, you find. I mean, I guess that uh, I don't know how much this happens in your circles, but we on occasion it's kind of been dead. But for a long time in RPG discussion, you had this sort of like realism movement, especially
Mm,
if you look at um, I guess this got started in late first edition.
yeah,
All these articles in Dragon Magazine about whatever falling damage is not realistic. This is not realistic, right? Uh, there is a an error of cognition in there somewhere that like they're correct very often. It's not very realistic that you could survive getting blasted by a dragon, right? But at the same time, there is sort of an element. It's not meant to be a complete perfect simulation of reality. It is meant to be
yeah.
like
Or
a
at the
game.
very least, it's meant to be a good simulation of another reality where these kinds of things do happen.
Sort of, yeah.
Mm,
I would say so. Yeah, it's not. But the point is that basically these two things have to
mm,
be juggled against each other. You want a
yeah,
game where your players can infer things based on more or less what could happen. You know, what would happen in real life, but not something that just gets bogged down in minutiae, or it's just even though it's very realistic, it's tedious to play.
yeah. Well, you don't want your system to be more complex than it needs to be in order to
Right.
properly simulate what you want to simulate. If you're trying to simulate something that has a more heroic flair, where you can rush into a single warrior can rush into a group of 20 and destroy them all dynasty warrior style, you're going to need a completely different set of rule set than something where one man versus one man is the most dangerous thing you can actually do.
Yeah, I think so. That's why universal systems don't really work because you
Mm,
always have to make those calls, right?
yeah.
What genre are you
Able
maybe
to
not
use, yeah.
emulating, but yeah, what kind of assumptions have you made? For sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's certain ones that work fairly well for, like, GURPS works really well for a certain kind of, level of power
Have you
level in
actually
terms.
played GURPS? I'm impressed. I've never played GURPS. I've always just like bounced off of
I've
it.
played it a couple of times. The thing about GURPS is that it's a toolkit that you need to, figure out what you're playing before you get to the table. Because if
I
you
see.
try to just do everything with it, you're just gonna drive yourself completely mental. You need to know exactly what you want to do first, build that up, use, decide which, elements and rules you want to use and are necessary for what you're doing. Then you can start working about, building up a proper setting or something like that. Like, it
Right.
works fairly well for, like, modern day kind of stuff. Like, if you want to do, I don't know, it's like special operations guys, doing some things. You got all the, gear, and the rule set is very much at that level where normal humans with a degree of, badassery to them can work out very well for that. But you still need to think about, okay, how lethal is this system for that? Because otherwise, yeah, we're going to need replacement PCs pretty quick.
Right.
Yeah. Although there is something to be said about, especially if you're doing something where you can just look up on Wikipedia or anything for the exact specs of the stuff that you're going to be doing, then it is important to kind of do your research and figure out how this stuff kind of works. For fantasy
Well,
stuff, it can be a little bit less important, but I still think that you want things to be recognizably, you don't necessarily want them to be realistic, but you want them to have that aforementioned verisimilitude so that a player won't have to necessarily reference, okay, how much damage do I take if I jump down this cliff? They just have to know, okay, it's a cliff. If I jump down this, it's gonna hurt like hell.
it's probably banned. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not a
Falling
good
down cliff
idea.
banned. No, there was, and I'm sure that in your interview with Mr. Brayton, you guys alluded to it before that there is an advantage to, I guess, having fantasy cultures based on actual historical cultures. Is that
Yeah,
you have to only come up with a few fantastic elements, and for all of the mundane detail, you always have a huge sort of like backlog of like
yeah.
reference
You have that
material to
historical
reference. Yeah,
context to really
exactly.
inform like the look. And if you have like something that you didn't think of before, well, you know what this culture is based on. So you can just
Yeah, for
look it
sure.
up and see what kind of thing there. Not Rome, what do they have for snacks? Well, we know what the actual Romans ate for snacks. So it's
Yeah.
hideous by modern standards, but
Is
apparently
that
they like this stuff.
that's oh yeah, yeah, that's certain fish sauce
Yeah,
among other things. Yeah, for sure.
among other things. Yeah. Or it's like the ancient Egyptians like to, sleep on the roofs of their houses. That's a nice little, touch of things that you can add to your thing. It's like, okay, I'm gonna sneak up the side of the roof to get inside. Oh, they're already up there. Shit. Okay.
So you could just go in through the door. But
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
no, and it's always I find that with my even with my own writing that besides all of the uh, you know, I read a lot of fantasy, but reading a little bit more ancient history has also
Mhm.
sort of like broadened my my horizon. So
Yeah.
it's a great source of inspiration as well.
Well, it was a great source of inspiration for the people who wrote that fantasy too. So you're going right to the sources at that point.
Usually, yes. As you get closer to the current year, then it's people inspired by the fantasy that was written that was inspired by real myth and history, and then you keep going until it's
Well, it's current year,
completely
so it's more
dilute.
like people who were inspired by the video games, who were inspired by the role playing games, who were
For
inspired by the
sure.
fantasy, was inspired by the fantasy, that was inspired by the retelling of the history told by another guy who did the other thing based on stuff he read somewhere.
If you there are I've been thinking about doing a sort of project around this, or maybe a blog post, sort of tracking all of the authors that came out after sort of D&D kind of it sort of codified fantasy. I
Yeah,
feel it
it
like with this
definitely
maybe
did.
not
Yeah.
with the appendix N, but like in a way, it's sort of it captured or it cemented a lot of these
Hmm.
concepts, and it influenced all of these things that came afterwards. So it would be interesting to I think maybe check out a few authors that are very clearly like explicitly influenced by Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. I mean, the whole notion's like you have the adventuring party and such as that, with, humans and elves and dwarves and,
Yeah,
not
it's all
hobbits. And
Tolkien. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
all Tolkien, but even Tolkien didn't do it the way it's often portrayed, which is far more D&D than anything that Tolkien did for the Fellowship.
Oh yeah, for sure. A
Mhm.
bunch of like very specific context is lost.
Yeah. And I wonder how much of that also comes from people who were influenced by the D&D novels themselves.
Well, so I think the D&D novels became it's kind of depressing actually that the D&D novels became very big at around the same time as that Sword and Sorcery is more or less completely extinct, right? You just had
Yeah.
the giant Tolkien clones coming out, and then maybe the closest thing you would get to heroic fantasy for a while, unless you knew where to look, right?
Yeah.
It would have been these Dungeons and Dragons novels. I hesitate to point, to make an estimate like how many people were influenced by it, but I'm sure a lot of people read them.
Yeah. I mean, Drizzt ain't no Elric, that's for damn sure.
I've I think I read 3 of them, but I did eventually find the courage to sell off my very cheaply acquired Drizzt Do'Urden hardcovers, and so I have a little bit more room in my
Good
house
on
now.
you. They're not bad books. It's just,
It, I, I always think that you can get the same, like it's like you can get the same high, basically. You can get the same feel, just way more quote unquote pure if if you read the real stuff.
yeah. Hey man, I got the good stuff here.
Right.
Pre
Yeah, it's a drug metaphor.
1970s.
I'm from the Netherlands. I had to. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
No, it's hey, the Dutch got a Dutch.
The Dutch got a Dutch, as they say.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Netherlands and stuff, you've also been covering recently some French stuff, Casus Belli, and the on your blogs you're doing, looking at older adventures from that publication. I remember back in high school, I'm in Quebec, Canada, so there's lots of French
Right.
stuff. And
Yeah.
we had a whole row in the high school library. There was nothing but BD. And there was lots of magazines on the long wall. And one of them was Casus Belli. And that was my first introduction to French RPGs. Like,
Really?
yeah, like Bloodlust, Cops, Bitume, and, other ones like, that particular era of French
Mega
RPG.
Force or something like that.
Megaforce,
Yeah. All of these
Simulacre.
far out stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know. There was some interesting what was it called? Histoire de Fou, which was a weird one where you're playing a bunch of schizophrenics who are getting sucked out of reality in weird
Oh,
scenarios.
the 90s. Is that Oh yeah, probably they made more of those.
Mhm.
I was thinking back to what is it, Rêve, the Dream,
Rêve de
Ouroboros,
Dragon.
or
Yeah, Rêve de
yeah,
Dragon.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
also though
yeah.
it introduced me a lot to the basic, basically the Chaosium D20 D100 system, and they
Mhm.
did a bunch of stuff with that too. They did épée sorcellerie, which was like musketeers versus sorcery and stuff like that, which is pretty cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's honestly been pretty fun. Um I was reading up on for the last year my project has sort of been to and that's what my eventually what No Art Punk, the design contest, is going to focus on. It's sort of been to bring back high level Dungeons and Dragons, because I
Mm.
think with the um, sort of this rules light trend and this sort of loss of a common frame of reference in the OSR of high level gaming, it was already rare, and now it's basically on the
Yeah.
endangered animals, the endangered species
There's
list.
way too much of a focus. Like, there's very much a focus on like mudcore. Everybody's. It's almost like Warhammer Fantasy, but in D&D, it's like low level. We're just fighting
It's
goblins in the temples in Vietnam.
what is it? Yeah, if I see one more level module for one more dungeon for level 1 to 3, I'm gonna throw up. Yeah, how many of them do you need? Well, I mean,
Uh,
obviously, it's exaggeration, right? I'm sure
yeah.
there's plenty of people who have done great work, but yes, you'll find almost nothing above, I guess, level 8, and sort of part of the, uh, you know, we've actually played. There was a high level game where we played one of Anthony Huzo's modules. It's called Dream House of the Nether Prince,
Mhm.
where you break into Orcus's basically his summer palace, and you have to complete some sort of objective, and it's like
Yeah.
just the most hellish, insane place ever. Everybody was at least level 14. The fighter has a hammer of thunderbolts and gauntlets of ogre strength and a belt of
Nice.
giant strength. The wizard can cast like 8 level spells. Everybody is like completely fully stacked, and really even preparing for that adventure was like it's almost like a commando mission where you're finding out your loadout, like what
Yeah. Yeah.
scrolls are
Yeah.
we gonna take. Right?
That's
Fucking
literally
great.
that's exactly
Yeah,
what you expect for something going off against something that much of a dangerous target. I mean,
yeah,
it's
right.
friggin' it's the freaking demon lord of the undead. You don't fuck
Exactly,
around with this thing. You gotta go in
exactly. and
prepped.
and that's phenomenal. That was great. I was like, this is awesome. People should do this more often.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've been and I'll get back to the topic, I promise. But so I've been running like high level Dungeons and Dragons for quite a while now, sort of like getting ready, and now I've written my own adventure. I hope I've gotten several contributions already. So hopefully with this next anthology, we will bring this extinct species back to
Back to
life,
life.
Jurassic Park style. Yeah,
Nice.
right.
Hopefully not with the same
Um,
consequences as Jurassic Park,
I hope
though.
actually that the consequences are the same. I hope exactly the same amount of deaths. Yes.
uh, so tell me more about No Art Punk for the people who don't know. How did this get started?
Um, well, so I've been reviewing for a while, right? And at some point I got into this let me, by the way, turn on a light. It's a little bit dark here. It's not usually this dark in the Netherlands. There we go. It's a little bit better. um it's less spooky also, right?
Well, I mean, it's
So
October. It would have been perfect.
Spooktober, that's right. Well, so I got started with some of these. Art punk was this is an actual genre, right? But it's actually more of a clique of more latecomers to the OSR that did
Mm.
pretty creative stuff. And while I was reviewing that, I at some point, like I got this realization where I was like, well, these ideas are good, but this is like the fundamentals are kind of like shitty, right? Or this wouldn't really work, and this is very clearly this person has just like thrown something together.
Hmm.
And how this works is that every generation, basically, of new gamers that comes after the previous one, it'll be more distorted, right? Because the context is increasingly lost. So at some point,
Yeah.
I got to like, what is it, the Morkborg or something, and I was
Oh,
like,
yeah, that one.
I got it. Something has to be done. This has to be stopped. Like
That one is
this
just
is nuts.
there's a game in here. It's buried under several layers worth of, fairly nice looking metally kind of, kind
Hot
of artwork.
topic style spooky. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not
it's
even
just
really edgy, right? It's
not
more,
really,
it has that
no.
sort of like, yeah, but it's like purely aesthetic, right? The actual
It's a
game,
coffee table book.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
an art
exactly.
book, basically, with a little bit of a game thrown in there for good measure.
Right. And that is kind of like when it clicked to me, is that like this, wait a minute, we're sort of losing track of what actually makes D&D great, which is not the uh, goofy, crazy ideas that aren't like, that are very rebellious. Like, look
Mhm.
at me, I'm subverting something or whatever.
Yeah, well, you can see a
Or
lot of
weird
that
art.
these days in
Yeah,
multiple different fields. It's
for
like
sure.
I'm better than what came before me. Look what I'm doing with it.
And that I'm sure that ties into it as well. It's a certain because of course all of this stuff is clustered, right? So you also see, and again, you start to notice things like, hey, wait a minute, like, these people don't actually give a shit about old school Dungeons and Dragons, right? So well, so I sort of conceived like, oh, I should probably do something about this. And I guess the best way to stop them would be to have a competition where you have to play D&D. That was like that's the kryptonite to stop them. So I conceived of an idea like, okay, it's an adventure design competition, but you have to use, book items, monsters, and spells. You're allowed one. You can come up with one monster and one item, right? But that's it, no more. And and you still have to make something good. Can you do that? And obviously this was people are very angry. But it did pretty well, and it turned out that actually a lot of people like playing D&D, and I got a ton of entries. And the second time around, the people that showed up were even more. It's I I think there is definitely a value in sort of stimulating people to engage with like all of the richness that is already there. And really, I can't see any way in which trying to make something with the tools that you're already provided is going to make you any worse. It's probably going to
Yeah,
make you way better.
I mean, what's the idea? Like, a great chef can take basic ingredients and make something absolutely wonderful with them.
Oh
You
yeah.
don't need to throw in the most exotic, strange spices that no one's ever thought of before. And oftentimes, if you do that, it's not going to taste like what's supposed to.
Well, that's it as well, right? Like all of this wacky high concept stuff. This appeals to novelty very often, but there's
Yeah,
very little. And again, we can go back to the great chef.
yeah. Style over
There's
substance.
Right. There's very little substance to it. Now, again, you'll have a mutant genius exception, or you'll have a person who actually already knows what he's doing, and then starts doing all this crazy shit. But then he
Yeah,
knows exactly where to place that, and what rules to break.
exactly. I mean, goes back to, people who house rule things before actually having ever read or played the rules. They're just,
Right.
throwing in stuff. They're just throwing in ingredients from another recipe into their recipe because they like those ingredients in that recipe, but they don't know if it's going to fit well in this, pork pot pie. You don't throw whipped cream in there. Sorry, it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of like what started it all off. I so the what I do is like these compilations. I pick the best. I think usually it's 8 entries, but it depends on like how many contributions I get. I
Mhm.
review all of them on my blog. So even for people that are relatively new and don't really have they don't really expect themselves to win because competition is quite fierce.
There's a lot of entries, and
We we
the
get
judge is
some
fairly strict.
professionals as well, right?
Yeah.
Like so, yeah, the judges, of course, are so merciless, absolutely merciless. Um, but even then, I'll still try to uh, find like points for improvement. And again, the only thing I do is to just look at what has been done earlier and what we know works from just playing the game for decennia, and apply that there. And very often there's a few rules, few tricks you can learn. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, it helps sometimes just go back to basics and seeing what you can create with that, simply because it then allows you to, really firm up your foundation so you can build something new on top of that.
Yeah, and I think it also sort of cements the this idea that like you can be very creative with all, if you're even if you only restrict yourself to the I don't know, I think you're allowed like 200. I don't know how many monsters there are in Monster Manual 1, 2, and 3, and then the Dragon Magazine compilation.
Mm.
It has to be in the hundreds, right? Oh
Yeah.
no,
Oh,
I can only use hundreds of monsters, right? It's silly, right?
yeah.
And you can do stuff with the map itself. You can come up with unique magical effects, or maybe aspect elements of the dungeon. Maybe you can do something with the geometry, all that stuff,
Yeah.
right? There's like so many avenues I feel that you can explore without immediately I don't know, coming up with this centaur monster with his fish arms and your dad's face or something like that.
Not the character's dad's face, the
Not
player's dad's
the
face.
player's dad. Yeah, that's right.
That's
Yeah,
something
he's
I've seen a lot of
casts
in
a
the
symbol of disappointment. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry,
that's
sorry,
something
I
I've seen a
interrupted
lot
you.
of in that kind of art punk scene, is a lot of, meta aspects that play more or
Yes,
less with either the player or with the, rule set itself or something like that. Less the effects that are,
no
strictly
immersion.
affect. Yeah, it's,
Yeah,
less strictly affecting the characters themselves within that world. It's, hey player, I got you. It's like, it feels like, you've seen that movie Funny Games, where the villains are like rewind the movie because they didn't like what the end result, and then just kill the main characters anyway.
I I haven't seen it, but you did explain it. So no, yeah, I
Oh,
think
okay,
you
sorry, spoilers.
no no problem. No, I wasn't going to watch it. No problem.
Okay.
No, that's exactly right. I think there's a sort of um I wonder actually what that lack of immersion comes from, but
Hmm.
it's ultimately maybe it's an insecurity, or maybe a sort of
Ironic
postmodernist.
detached, yeah, a bit of
Yes,
ironic
ironic detachment,
detachment or
right?
something like
Yeah,
that.
but that ironic detachment again is ultimately, it is an insecurity, right? If you're very good, then screwing around and making something that ironically breaks the rules, that's like a little extra flourish, right? But
Yeah.
if you don't, then it provides people with sort of cover. They can just say, "Oh, ha ha," this is not meant to be
Yes.
taken seriously, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no,
the
make
whole
serious
kind of,
stuff.
yeah, exactly. It's a well, I think it kind of comes, it comes naturally to a lot of people because we know all the Monty Python jokes that get played around when people are playing D&D. There's already a
Right.
level of detachment from the events simply
I
because,
would hope so. Yeah.
yeah. Well, obviously, no one wants to be Tom Hanks in that movie.
I still think I'm a level 5 wizard. Sorry, man. Yeah,
I have a battle mech parked in my backyard, so
exactly. Yeah,
in
I
my
was
mind,
thinking the same thing. Yeah.
yeah.
No, but you were saying, all right, like with this, that there's already, yeah, your players are already probably going to like a goof off a little bit. There's really no need to, I feel the DM is more often a straight man
Yeah,
when
that's
it comes
often
to
the
that.
case. Yeah. But then
Yeah.
again, when you then the adventure or the system itself oftentimes has these kinds of things where it allows the seriousness of the DM, that straight man aspect, to go off the rails. That just encourages everything else to go crazy, even more so.
Yeah. Too many, I guess, too many levels of irony.
Mm.
It is what it is.
Sincerity, I think, is making a bit of a comeback though, in terms of in many genres. In fact, there's a bit more of a, especially if we go back to like the resurgence of sword and sorcery and stuff like that, in many
Right.
the indie scenes and stuff like that. There is a lot less of that level of insecurity. People like this stuff, and they're not afraid to just go balls out and do it properly with sincerity, which is something I appreciate quite a bit.
Well, I guess my perspective is that so mainstream culture definitely does not have that. It's like
No.
pretty rotten, but because of the wonders of modern technology, you do see a lot of like sort of like independent publishers taking a
Yeah,
stab at it. And I would say
exactly.
definitely, Sword and Sorcery, it is making a comeback, which is I'm very happy to see.
Same
Just
here.
this, I think, yeah, just not yesterday. I think I just finished. I don't know if you know DMR Books.
Oh yeah,
Okay, all
I've
right,
read
very
quite a
good.
few of
Yeah,
their books.
excellent.
I have quite a few
Yeah,
of their books
so
here, and I've read quite a few of them too.
yeah, I'm slowly filling up my shelves as well. I'm also getting addicted. Yes, was the what is it the Chronicles of Kalen Tor by
Mm. Val Shoggoth,
the
yeah.
Bal Sagoth singer. That was crazy, right? And I read this, I read it, and I was like, this is if this was a less talented author, the writing would be like purple prose, but it's like it's actually perfect, and
Yeah,
there's no wink to it either. It's like totally sincere, and it's perfect,
exactly.
right?
That's
Yeah,
perfect right there. It,
yeah.
any kind of art requires a certain degree of talent if you want to have it at the level that you want. But if you can do it right, oh, it sings. Especially when it comes to that kind of more lyrical prose that often accompanies sword sorcery at its best. Yeah,
Yeah, and I do think that probably yeah, people have sort of had enough of or at least I should say some people have had enough of kind of like this sort of like constant subversion and wink wink nudge nudge and
yeah.
are turning back to sort of stories that speak to I guess a more sort of like fundamental human qualities that can still be appreciated. How this um I think in the uh, you know, looking on the OSR, there has been a sort of burgeoning movement of like people championing more what is it vanilla D&D and sort of like going back to the essence and turning away
Mm-hmm.
from the sort of like uber rules light anything goes art punk stuff,
It's like,
which
yeah,
I think is
it's like the
hopeful.
kind of
Yeah.
thing where the system is so simple that you might as well just be flipping a coin sometimes
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah. Right, or whatever. Yeah. Play pretend in the forest, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, and it's hope I think it's hopeful that there's a that sort of like there is a market for it, right? There's definitely it is a minority, but it is a pretty decent minority that
Yeah.
are simply looking for something else in their games.
To be honest,
And
given how
hopefully
fractured the RPG, public playing public is to a large
yeah.
extent, I mean, would we even say it's a minority? Because it's kind of hard to say exactly how much of it would be interested in that, considering just how fragmented everything is.
I'm hoping we're going to find out,
Mm.
and I'm hoping whatever rift is now sort of visibly occurring with these, and it'll eventually all be two camps, and then like some scattered, third parties that we don't really have to worry about.
Mm.
The I hope this rift sort of will continue because I think it'll be, for the greater health these groups if they can kind of like figure out if they can be more open and honest about what it is they want. So
Yeah,
yeah, I for one
exactly.
look forward to the dissolution. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the whole, like, traditional RPG story game kind of also division that, occurred, where this is not a derogatory thing. Story games are doing something different, far more narrative focused, far more meta focused than traditional RPGs. And if you try mixing and matching them, you're going to end up with a headache. Whereas if you keep them, in their own categories with some overlap, obviously, because some people do enjoy that, having a little bit of their chocolate and their peanut butter and vice versa, you're going to end up with a whole lot less argument over stupid shit and far more good gaming because people are actually going to get what they want out of the games that they want.
Yes, although I should give a caveat, which
Mm.
is that I believe Alexander Macros has phrased it far more eloquently than I will. But so there is this sort of again this idea in the tabletop RPG space that we can all get along, and the answer is like we really can't.
No,
You have
we
to
can't get
sort of
along in any other form of
no,
human interaction,
but
much less
but
RPGs.
even more saliently, I guess, you have to advocate for, what it is you want. So
Mm.
in that way, people who also want what you want, they'll be inclined to get there sooner, right?
Yeah.
If you don't advocate, if you don't proselytize, then you will go extinct, right? So
Yeah.
absolutely. But the one thing is that I feel that competition should probably be like there's healthy forms of competition and unhealthy forms,
Yeah.
right? If we would fight it out with like say like a I don't know car bombings or something, maybe not the best way.
Begun the RPG wars have.
Yeah, basically, which would be actual wars, right?
Yeah.
But so I do try to sort of um, I understand that this conflict is like necessary, and I will not lie. I highly enjoy it, but it has to be sort of channeled in directions that are, wholesome and vital, right?
Yeah.
Ideally, you do something, and then your opponent um, would rise to the challenge, right? So in my perfect world, I run no art punk, and then all the art punks they're like, I'm gonna win no art punk. I'll show the chuds, and they'll write like goblins, right? And then I pick one as the winner, and the guy he rips off his mask like in Scooby Doo, and he'll be like my biggest enemy, right?
Yeah.
But that never happens. It's like very lame. It's instead, they'll try to
You
uh,
suck.
yeah, they'll like harass anybody reviewing art punk. They'll be like, this place is I can't believe you're platforming this person. Like, and yeah, long time reader here, I just want to say how disappointed I am, like that sort of stuff. Very,
Uh,
very bad.
I
So
mean, I've seen what you like whenever there's like the big OSR drama. I've seen the
yeah.
takedowns that you've written of those in pure lyrical format. These people do not know who they're dealing with, man. I've seen what you can do with this shit.
It's well, yeah, I still hope that like someday I'll get a like I guess a real ass enemy. Yeah, no, but unfortunately not yet. Who
Mm,
knows? Maybe this one, maybe this year.
Well, I wouldn't really I hope you do tend to be, decently nice person, so I doubt that you'll get too many enemies.
Well, I have recent. I don't know how plugged in you are to RPG drama, but I was nominated as one of the I think top 5 absolute no-nos on the OSR Discord block list
Oh God.
next to
Well, it's the OSR Discord block list.
so this is yeah apparently they circulate some sort of message, right, some sort of list of like oh yeah, you want to avoid these people,
Yes.
and then you have like the problematic category, and then
Das
above
Mensch ist
that,
verboten. Verboten.
yes, that's like the what is it, the suppressive persons, right? If you even so much as like just talk about me, then all these people will
Oh God.
yeah, that, and I mean, some of those guys on the that I'm them on the list with are actually pretty cool. Like Alexander Macros is on the
Mm,
list, Gabor Lux is on the list, but
yeah.
then there's like other people on that list. You think like, geez, like what is it? Um, there was one person who was actually in the problematic category, but I think he was like a domestic abuser or something.
Oh
That
God.
guy's like rated below me. So I
They're
guess I made a few
yeah.
enemies, but
I mean, their
it's ultimately very
heuristics for who
stupid.
is a bad person are a little bit how should I put this? Fucked in many ways.
It's a little dubious, that's for sure. But
Uh,
I do use a lot of like swear words, so maybe I have it coming. I guess I'm asking for it.
whatever.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, you can generally judge your quality by the quality of your enemies. Because
That's that's true as well. And um yeah, I don't know. This like with this drama stuff, I uh, in a way, again, going back to the ostracizers are evil social fallacy, I totally agree. Some people should be kept out of the hobby, but
oh
not
yeah,
me. The guys who are against me, they need to go. I
yeah.
get to stay.
I've
Um,
noticed that the people who complain the most, you shouldn't do gatekeeping and stuff like that. Dude, you gatekeep all the time.
yeah, for
You
sure.
have different qualifications for who gets booted out,
That's
and they're
it,
usually
right?
nothing to do with the game itself. It's
And that's the problem.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. We should gate. I definitely agree. We should gatekeep. And it should be we should gatekeep people that don't want to play D&D. We should not have those in a hobby where they play old school D&D. Pretty easy,
yeah.
right? Yeah,
That seems like the basic thing. If you don't want to play the game that we're currently playing, well, then we're not going to invite you over to play because you're not going to enjoy yourself, and we're not going to enjoy having you around. And we might like to have you for other games. So let's not screw things up.
yeah. And I guess if and this is, I suppose, a lesson that we've all sort of learned that if we lived in a world where instead of gatekeeping, we could genuinely have this sort of like big open tent where everybody got along effortlessly, and there was no, there's no human social
Mhm.
dynamics that completely ruined that have been around for all eternity.
Mhm.
Then that would also be my preference. But when that's not the case, then you have to choose like, okay, how are we actually going to keep people out? And then
Mhm.
the
And how are
healthiest
we
thing
going to
for the
judge
hobby,
who we let in?
yeah, basically,
Yeah.
right.
And how are we
And
going
the
to
healthiest
judge
thing is
who do we let people in or out? Who are the gatekeepers in that case? Is it
uh,
everybody at their own table? Do we have tastemakers in a particular scene who do are the ones who
you'll
provide
always
the
get
example? Or
tastemakers or people that control platforms that are sort of entry points into the
Mhm.
hobby. And unfortunately, a lot of power will always gravitate towards those people.
Yeah, various forums and discords, blogs,
Yeah, for
places
sure.
like that.
Yeah.
Hmm. And it very much is a question of like you have to be, as you say, you have to proclaim what you want, and that it happens not just in terms of publications, like telling people we want more of this, but also at your own gaming table, we want more of this kind of person, this particular attitude, and this particular taste, which fits in with what we're already doing.
I'm trying to think back. Like you've probably had when you were younger, I suppose. I don't know how old you are, but I don't know if you've ever had games with DMs that that are too accommodating to their players,
Mm,
where they'll like bend over back. Oh no, please, I'll give you this. Right, like that's probably a bad thing.
yeah,
I definitely think that you should have, even on the level of your personal table, you should have some sort of like vision of how the game should be run.
yeah.
But at the same time,
You
every
don't want to
table
be
is
too inflexible as well.
right. Yeah, every table has sort of like its own strengths and weaknesses, and you can. There's definitely a lot of like leeway before you immediately have to, maybe soft break people's spirit or just throw them out.
Yeah.
Most
Well,
people you
for
can
throwing people
probably,
out, it's basically in terms of
yeah,
like, bad behavior or just, boorishness and stuff like that. If someone is not getting along with the other people at the table, then
yeah,
obviously then that is a problem that needs to be dealt with, quickly and,
for sure.
outside of the game itself. But in terms of like, just I want to be an elf. This is Hyborian age. We don't have elves, sorry. It's just
No, okay, so I'll try to like sort of gauge that request. I'll try to
yeah.
figure out like, why does this person want to be an elf? And there might not be an elf in the Hyborian age, but there might be some sort of like some sort of race of man that'll fulfill the same kind of like role that this character wants to play,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Like, maybe the person just enjoys having pointy ears or something like that for some
Right,
whatever.
exactly.
It's
So
more
it's
of an
like if a
aesthetic
person
than
asks,
anything
like, "Can I
else.
be a fox person?" and then you have to ask, like, "Well, why do you want that?" He says, "Because, well, I want to have sex with animals." And you go, "Oh, okay, get out." Right?
Oh God.
Exactly. That's exactly it. No,
Yeah.
but so it's about sort of figuring out what that person wants out of your game, and I do think it's better if it's genuinely incompatible
Mhm.
to to be upfront about that. But for the most part, I think people are people are multifaceted. What they want out of your game is usually more than one thing.
And sometimes they don't even know exactly what they want necessarily. That's often the case for a lot
Right.
of people.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
And you mentioned it before, right? Some people just want to hang out, perfectly fine.
Mhm.
Uh, if you have a few of those players, and they're just kind of like they like chilling with their friends. This is what you do. They play D&D, right? That's good.
Yeah.
And then maybe a few like guys that are really into it, or
Yeah,
one's
who really
maybe
enjoy the
really
the intricacies of system mastery and stuff like that.
right.
For them, a
Yeah,
very simple system will not be sufficient because there's just not enough, to chew on for that.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and
So you
oftentimes there's a combination of aspects. Like they want to do that, but they want to do it with their friends who also like to do that.
yeah, for sure. So yeah, I definitely think you know, uh, keep gatekeep a little bit, but there's a lot of leeway
Yeah,
before you have to do that.
yeah. The gate is there, but it's not locked. There's someone there to open the door for you, but there's also someone their bouncers in there to kick you the fuck out if you start causing a ruckus and mistreating people.
Well, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's tying it back into I guess the old school Renaissance. I think it's perfectly acceptable to if you form some sort of group. If you say like, well, this is about old school D&D. If you don't like that, maybe don't hang out here.
Yeah.
And theoretically, somebody can always decide. I think I'll be into old school D&D, I guess, and then can say, okay, hello.
Yeah. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with, coming into something, seeing that it doesn't, trying it out, seeing it doesn't appeal to you for X reason, any reason, and saying, you know what? No, thanks for letting me in. I'm going to, just let myself out and do my own thing someplace else. Or if you guys want to do this other thing too sometime, we can do that too. You might like it, you might not. We can experiment with that too. If people were just a bit more open about, just moving on instead of trying to screw around with things, the whole square peg and round hole thing. If people just, okay, this is my hole, I fit here, I am happy here. If you guys want to try it out, go right ahead. If you don't like it, you have your own thing that you can get into.
Well, yeah, uh, it sounds a little crazy, but the problem is usually that when when you have when you have a group, and you'll see this in whatever, you see it in comic fandom as well, right? Or
Mm.
science fiction fandom even. uh you know that'll attract a certain type of person, and they'll actually not be um they'll not be into what you're into, right? Or what most of these people are into, but they're into something else, and not a lot of people like that thing. But they think that, like, if I just like pretend to like the thing you do, and then sort of gradually shift it, I
Yeah,
can trick people to like my stuff
I've
instead.
seen people
And
try
it's
to do that.
crazy, but it's true. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like you're playing with a ZDM and gradually starts introducing, and then it's like, dare you enter my magical realm?
yeah. Oh,
Those
oh
who
boy.
know, and they know it's horrible. But yeah, because this isn't just players, this is DMs as well who will, try to introduce like I know I read one particular forum post somewhere way back about a DM who was okay. I'm running this adventure. How do I introduce this hardcore philosophical concept into this so I can really teach my players about it? And it's like,
Teach them about Nietzsche.
sir, this is a
Yeah,
Wendy's.
exactly.
It's like, okay, this is not a group therapy session. It's not that kind of role playing. It's not the other kind of role playing either. So put the whips away. It's like we're trying to play D&D here.
Oh,
We're
he'd been working
jets.
you guys up towards that moment, just
Yeah,
dropping subtle philosophical hints, and then it's like, yes, now behold the Ding an sich. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. It's just like oof. The only grooming we're interested in doing here is getting this Pegasus up to par so I can ride into battle
Okay,
later.
all
You
right.
know?
Oof. Okay. My
Yeah,
heart stopped for a moment. Okay, we're still safe. Very good.
yeah. I mean, that is one of the issues often in, geek spaces a lot. You get a lot of people who, for whatever reason, think that, everything goes in terms of what they can bring into things. And they hopefully get told fairly early on, okay, this ain't the place for that.
Well, this is another. It all comes back to this sort of geek social fallacy.
Mm,
I think article. It's the idea of like ostracizers are evil. A lot of people, definitely in the TTRPG space, still are just nerds.
mhm.
They probably weren't like the very high. Obviously, there's exceptions, right? But they probably weren't the very highest on the social totem pole in high
No, no.
school. So, you know, you you end up with groups that are, by they're going to be fairly open, right, and forgiving of people's flaws because we've all gone through the trauma of like rejection. You don't want to inflict that on other people, right? So,
Yeah.
so it makes sense that sort of like nerd culture got this, uh, got the structure that it did, but at the same time, there's
It's
some
got some
people like it's not
disadvantages inherent to
okay,
it.
right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There's a catfish man. You don't want that guy. Like, just if somebody's like um, too nuts, you definitely have to draw a boundary somewhere.
Yeah.
And again, if you don't, then it's going to be the catfish men that'll get there, and they'll draw the lines against you. Then you'll be banned.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you really do need a degree of social, awareness and ability, a degree of charisma, frankly. Not necessarily much, but just enough to be able to get along with other people, to, actually
I think
have a social activity with other people.
you need to fulfill the basic standards of like social interaction for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, well, on the plus side, thanks to the internet and stuff like that, we can actually get groups together who do actually match up in terms of both, social ability and in terms of, their interests and stuff, even if those interests aren't necessarily as mainstream as, standard D&D 5th edition or 1 D&D or whatever the hell Watsy's doing nowadays, which is still, unfortunately, the 800 pound gorilla in the room. But
Um, I guess I'm less negative about 5e than most people, but that's because I never really engaged with it very much.
mm,
I played a few games of 5e,
to
and
be, yeah,
under a novice DM, it was okay, right?
yeah, to be fair, my distaste for 5e isn't nearly that pronounced. Ultimately, I just, don't really pay attention to it much anymore as opposed to shitting on it. It's just that it's not doing anything I want out of the game. Simple as
Well,
that.
yeah, that's totally valid, right? Because it's
Mm.
it's the big compromise edition, basically when
Oh yeah.
they scaled back a bunch of the accesses of yeah, I guess 4E and 3E before it, right? This is going to be the big tent edition, basically easy to start. Everybody has a lot of powers, so they
Mm.
feel really strong, all
Yeah.
that
And I
stuff,
played it for 2 years. I had a whole campaign
right?
going. So, I know what
Yeah,
I'm
for
talking
sure.
about. I didn't just, read the book and just discard it. I actually put it into practice for quite some time.
But I think if you talk to like Zoomers, then it's like they've been oppressed by 5e, that they've been in some sort of like prison
Oh
with
God.
like these sort of you hear these horror stories about actually even from older people that try to I knew this guy, and he moved to Texas and he tried to get a game going. There was one in the game store, and it was like what he described was like it was crazy, like what where it was a sort of bizarre theater acting with people
Oh
with
God.
these these crazy ass high concept characters with mental illnesses that they were playing out.
Oh
And
no.
there was like a training as well, and you get your consent cards or whatever the
Oh
hell it
God.
is, these X cards. So it's like something
Oh.
that you wouldn't even recognize, but um, this is
D&D is not therapy. Seek a professional therapist. If you seek therapy, do not go to a DM. That is a really
right.
bad idea.
But that's more I think the sort of like the culture around it
Mm,
that is grown around it. The game itself is um it's all right. I occasionally have the the privilege of sometimes people that started in 5e and have been making the move to OSR. They send me their stuff, and I review it, and some of them are pretty good.
Hmm.
So there's I feel it's so big. You're going to find tons of normal people in there as well.
Oh well, yeah, of course.
Right.
It's like with any kind of RPG horror story that you find online. You're always going to find the worst stuff first because that's the stuff that gets the most eyeballs.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, but I think this brings into everybody needing to be. It brings to the point of everybody needing to be on the same page when you're going to start something like this. It's like any kind of social activity, whether it's a party or a team sports kind of thing. You need everybody to be there for the same reason, or at least compatible reasons, if it's
That's
ever going
that's
to
the one.
go
Yeah,
the
that's the money
distance. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
yeah.
and within that compatibility, again, there's plenty of degrees of freedom. Some people might like even the role playing elements a little bit more, or they get more immersed, or they like, as you say, like the combat. Some people love this idea of like um, inhabiting this world and setting up their own goals and achieving them.
Mhm.
It's very broad, but it definitely has boundaries for sure.
Yeah, and those boundaries are what make it ultimately a role-playing game in the sense that it doesn't, suddenly go. That's one of the things about, people who really want the RPG genre to cover all sorts of stuff that isn't necessarily that, because you end up with a definition that doesn't mean anything, and the actual game itself gets kind of lost in the shuffle at a certain point.
Well, I mean, I guess RPG is very broad, but
Hmm.
yes, as soon as you start, I guess any term sort of suffers from right that sort of dilution, where
Mm.
at some point it's just a meaningless noise that you make.
Yeah,
The
that's always
the
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 problem
boundaries
with
keep
it.
getting broader and broader. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing because sometimes those boundaries expand to cover things that are beneficial for the thing itself, but other times it does result in dissolution. So it's very much, sometimes you do need to take down Chesterton's fence, but you got to know why and you got to know how.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think the way I sort of conceive it is that I'm not hoping that I will, with no art punk, that I will finally defeat creativity forever, and everybody will be will be absolutely. They'll have some sort of officer standing, looking over them, maybe an AI monitoring the games that they run to make sure that they're
Yeah.
using
An
only the
RPG
approved
commissar at every
monsters.
table.
Exactly. Yes. Uh, that sounds rad. But but that's not the idea. It's more. I feel you get a sort of creative explosion, and then as it expands, you're going to have some innovation that's useful, and at some point the innovation becomes less and less meaningful.
Hmm.
Um, until hopefully, what I'm trying to create here or stimulate here is a sort of contraction where you go back to sort of the fundamentals, you cast off some of the baggage, and then you can start over again.
Yeah.
And
Just like
probably
what
the
happened
most
with the OSR to begin with.
right. Yeah, I think so. Like a lot of like I think pop culture movements sort of operate in that way, where
Mhm.
you have periods of expansion and wild experimentation, and then you have a sort of periods of like contraction where you start focusing. You basically you go back to the well, yeah, which is what the
Mhm.
OSR is about, indeed.
Yeah, you look at like in the movies, you had these great, huge blockbusters, things this 50s and 60s, and it grew to this huge scope. You had your, sword and sandals kind of movies. You had your, peplums and your Ten Commandments. You had your Ben Hur. You had your Cleopatra and stuff like that. And then in the 70s, they keep going back to like more lower scale movies become more popular. The more indie like three people in a room having a intense discussion kind of movie, and that wins the Oscar for something. Or you go, and
For
that
sure.
then balloons back up as we go into the 80s with now bigger movies and bigger budgets and bigger scale, and then things go back down again, and things you have that in pretty much everything to a certain extent.
Yeah, waves. I I think probably 70s science fiction movies versus 80s science fiction movies with Star Wars, and shortly after that, Flash Gordon are probably a great example
Oh
of
yeah,
like
you got
those
Star
really,
Wars versus before that the Forbin Project. Yeah, Colossus the
yeah,
Forbin Project or something like that. Yeah.
2001 Space Odyssey, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. Like very cerebral, maybe like semi psychedelic, kind of slow moving, and then like just pure action. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have, a bit of return. Like you sometimes you have aspects that take elements of both those and mix them together to form something that's more of an amalgamation that can do its own thing.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I definitely think that. I mean, I'm not a fundamentalist, right? Like, I do believe that in this little this little corner of the hobby that I'm in, there are definitely interesting elements in other games that you could probably borrow and sort of like use in your own games, just as long as you don't lose track of like what the what the essence
Yeah.
of the hobby is all about.
Yeah, I think that's important both for, role-playing games and literature for that matter, for, literary genres. I mean, if you going back to one of our favorite sword and sorcery, if you lose the essence of that, it ceases to be what you want from it, really.
Yeah, I think that may have been and again, I haven't really followed the new weird movement beyond. I
Mm,
don't know if you've read the China Maville, but
not really.
okay,
Yeah,
all right.
it
China Maville, right? Perdido
yeah.
Street Station, a pretty interesting book, I'll say.
Yeah.
But so attempts to sort of revitalize this genre of like fiction of like weird tales and sword and sorcery previously, I don't think they were quite successful because they tried to sort of like quote unquote modernize it in such a fundamental way that they totally lost the essence, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, they
exactly.
lost track of like what sword and sorcery is all about. So it doesn't quite hit in the same way.
No.
And
I
yeah,
mean,
I do feel
in the process, they created that whole new weird movement, which appealed to a whole other audience. So,
well
they didn't,
for a while.
yeah, for a while. That's the thing about these kinds of things. If you're built on something and you're trying to recreate something, but you lose the essence of it, you're building on sand to a certain extent. You may create something that lasts for a bit, but it's going to be a bit unstable.
um, I guess as soon as you change, you either you have a period of flux, right?
Mm,
And I often bring up, I guess, Lamentations of the Flame Princess is a
mm,
good TTRPG example. Um, you can for a while, if you have a set of like rules, once you evaporate, once you get rid of those for a while, you can produce genuinely engaging stuff because
oh yeah,
again,
and
people stretch their
I've
wings
liked quite a few of their publications.
for sure.
Mhm.
But what you see over time is you should have there should be some sort of like consolidation afterward. Um, Otherwise, people lose again, if there's no answers at all,
You
right?
lose
At
the
some point,
thread.
you lose track of the thing that you're pushing against, right?
Mhm.
And then it's meaningless almost. What can you do? You can attract people with a sort of like shock value, but
Yeah.
then again, right, just you're gonna run out of steam real quick.
If you're allowed to do anything,
Right. That's very
then
paralyzing.
ultimately you may end up doing nothing.
Right, exactly. If I tell you you have to make a dungeon for me, and it can be about anything. Ooh, it has to be about Immanuel Kant. It has to be about the Ding an sich, right? Okay, hold on a minute, right?
Okay.
Whereas if I have a very narrow frame of reference, like yeah, 50 rooms, you can only use I don't know bears or bugbears or bears, and then you start thinking, okay, what else can I use here? I have a bear deity. Would that be allowed? No, no, no.
Bear
Okay, how do I
traps.
handle this? Bear traps, whatever, right? But the point is, this is a narrow sort of like concept that you
Mhm.
can work within, and yeah, very often this sort of like creativity usually works well under constraints, and as soon as you get rid of the fence, well, it's nothing beyond it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because then your creativity is no longer concentrated along a particular topic. It's just spread out over these
Yes.
infinite possibilities, which means once you do settle on the one thing, well, you got to bring all that creativity back onto that, or it's not going to have enough of it to really make it sing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there are genuinely again people that will perform really well without too many restrictions, right? That's sort of like part of the creative beast. But I feel over time you're always going to see diminishing returns real quickly.
Yeah. There's
You
only
need
so
the sort
many
of
times you can try to
axis. Yeah,
one up yourself.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, even, someone who has done that for quite some time, sometimes they do just want to go back to basics and, start up again from where they, started out.
Right.
Yeah. One thing I've looking at, speaking of adventures and stuff like that, your own adventure, like Red Prophet Rises. I was looking over that one a little bit here, and I'm in. Well, one, I like to see how this particular philosophy went into creating your own adventures for that, because I've seen a lot of good stuff in that one, especially because I've read that one especially. I'm also going over the other one, Palace of the Unquiet Repose here, especially the DCC version, because I happen to like that system quite a bit. And
All right.
that one I like quite a bit. The basic setup for that adventure, you went into pretty good detail for not only like what's happening there, but also when it's happening, how it's happening, what happens, how it reacts to the players, interactions with it, like different levels of alarm, what the different NPCs will be doing, what the time frames they're on. So
Oh yeah, a
yeah,
timetable.
timetables. I think for any kind of location based adventure, having some kind of timetable, at least not necessarily a timetable for incoming events, but having like the basic routine of what's going to be happening is I feel pretty important for getting the place to feel lived in, as opposed to just like frozen in place until the players arrive.
Um, you mentioned something similar with the Morton Broughton interview.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to qualify. Red Prophet Rises. The first version was by Aaron. That was my co-author.
Yeah.
I came in later, and together we went through all of the encounters. I kind of like punched it up.
Nice.
But he definitely did a lot of the work as well. But the so I feel timetables can work. You can also just work with a percentage chance, as long as it. Some people go way overboard, right? But
Yeah.
it can be a way of sort of allowing for it. What it does, it rewards. It makes it feel alive, but it also rewards scouting, I guess,
Yeah,
reconnaissance,
exactly.
right? It rewards players that kind of get a feel for like the I guess sort of the rhythms of the environment that they're that they're going to raid, so that maybe once they if they take a day to sort of observe the blood cultists in the canyon, then maybe they'll figure out, oh, okay, he does the prisoner fighting at 12 o'clock. We've got 2 hours to raid the canyon
Yeah.
or the cavern. So while that's going on,
And oftentimes you can always throw in a monkey wrench because not everything is going to be immediately evident. Like certain NPCs might have their own schedules of things that they're going to be doing that interrupts
yes,
the regular flow of things. And then you have of course, if the players get detected, then, all bets are off. Or if they decide to, introduce themselves right up to the front gate, how that has an impact on, what do the characters do.
for sure. And if sometimes it's either too laborious or not appropriate to make a whole complicated timetable, because it can be it does mean that you have to keep very precise track of what hour of the day it is. You can always use a random encounter table instead, but that
Oh
also
yeah.
kind of keeps the game very very dynamic, and it also serves as a actually, just like a timetable. The good effect is that the players are put under a certain type of pressure, which means that they'll have to carefully weigh their actions in a way that they'll need a certain economy, right? They can't
Yeah.
say, I don't know, like search every room or take infinite time
Yeah. I mean,
preparing
that's
for some
exactly
fight.
what, things like, torches last for X number of turns, and, you
Yep.
roll for encounters X number of turns, especially if they're making a lot of noise, searching all those rooms. And, at a certain point, you do need to eat and rest. And, these aren't just automatons you're playing, they're people. So they have their own wants and needs, and their own personality traits, perhaps, depending on the system. I mean, would a character start taking some stress damage from spending so much time in a dank, dangerous environment, or start having morale checks every now and then that will affect their to the
I
village
always
going
assumed
forward.
that adventurers are some sort of ancient equivalent of modern extreme sports guys. So I genuinely assume that like these are the whatever the crazy ass 1%, the guys that say
Yeah.
you want to play Russian roulette, and if you win $50,000, like all right, here, give me the gun, right? I'll do it twice, right?
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah, them, yes, but
but
their henchmen, that's a whole other story.
oh yeah, for sure. That what you said, it reminds me a little bit of Darkest Dungeon, I think. But right,
Yeah.
and
Well, going back to those French RPGs I mentioned earlier, a lot of them, like Bloodlust, has characters with specific personality traits that actually do impact in have gameplay impact, depending on what you selected. Like someone with a propensity towards violence be far more likely to be forced into a bar fight than someone who doesn't. Depending on there. Plus, it affects the various magic weapons that are the main focus of that RPG also affect everybody else, and the astral phenomena of that planet also affects everybody's personality traits in positive or negative ways.
it
Like there's
sounds pretty
yeah.
spacey. I do think though that for NPCs, I'm totally on board, and I
Mm.
think there's a often neglected table that I only recently discovered in even in AD&D that assigns like personality traits to randomly generated NPCs, and it will sort of determine the successful outcome of, like, say, trying to bargain with them or that sort of stuff, or their loyalty, right?
Mhm.
But I think there is definitely uh, there's a difference between doing that and then assigning traits to a player character and then suddenly saying to the player like, hey, wait a minute, you have to roll, and if not, then you're no longer in complete control of your character, right? Like his
Yeah.
urges will bring him into a like, say, a bar fight, like you just said.
Well, I think in those cases, it helps if you have some kind of like, stress meter or whatever the hell kind of mechanic, a psychological mechanic. So that way
Right.
you don't force the player to make an action. But if the player does not take an action, it's going to, cause negative impact on the character. You don't actually
Right.
have to get into that bar fight, but you're gritting your teeth, like, oh, I really, really want to get in there, but I gotta stay here and guard this gate. Shit. And your character's like, builds up a little bit of stress they'll have to, burn off some other time. Maybe he has the particular, we're talking Bloodlust, so there is a sex meter. At least the original one did,
Why
yeah.
am I not surprised? The French game with a sex meter. Well,
This
well,
the
well.
second the second edition
The
replaced that
second
with
sex meter. Yeah.
the second edition, the Bloodlust Edition Metal, replaced that with pleasure instead. So it's more like sex, drugs,
Oh,
rock and
okay.
roll. But in the first
So,
one, it was literally just called sex.
okay.
Like it was violence, sex, greed, prestige, power, all the things that make it's that kind of game. So it's like all the things that a character would want, basically their goals in
Right.
life. But yeah, like in the second edition, they had like stress meter and stuff like that. So yeah, getting laid would help you burn off some stress. And
I
depending,
can somebody explain to me the appeal of, I understand that sex is a thing in the real world, don't get me wrong, but the the appeal of like being in a game in a room with dudes and then
it is often dudes,
pretending
yes.
to have imaginary sex with this other man who pretends to be, he says it's okay, I'm a beautiful
It's
woman.
okay. We're role
You'll get
playing.
experience points here. Yeah, right. Let's do it. Well, and then you go, well, it seems very awkward in a way. Like, I don't know.
Oh no. Yeah. Well, definitely it's the kind of thing where you draw a veil on certain things that you don't want to go into detail.
A chaste veil. Okay, the screen fades out. You hear
Yeah.
romantic
I
music.
mean, that's what they did back in the day when Howard was writing a sex scene for Conan. He didn't exactly go into full detail. I mean, that was later authors who decided to go, far
I
more in
think
depth than
that's
that.
yeah. I think that's to his credit
Mhm.
almost, because I mean, you've got an imagination, right? You don't really need to go all the
Yeah.
way. You need to go full Fritz Lieber. I love Fritz Lieber, but don't read his last book.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
I sold it. I got rid of it. That was too much. Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely certain authors that, again, it's that whole one-upsmanship. Like, okay, yeah, back then they couldn't go that far because they had certain rules with regards to content and stuff like that. Oh, we don't have those anymore. We can go as far as we want. I'm gonna take it to the moon.
We're
And
gonna
then
yeah,
like
we're gonna go full Andre
Lear
Offord.
jets.
Yeah. Now, yeah, that's
You
true.
don't need to go
But
full gore.
Well, John Norman. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, he
Very
went, it starts out like, okay, this is a, interesting kind of thing,
what
concept
an
of one
interesting
world, and then he
world.
just goes, oh
All these
dear.
sentiments. I agree with them. All of them. Yeah.
It's like at a certain point, when did this become porn?
That's You see, that's weird. I often thought that really that John Norman's problem was his restraint. He didn't go far enough in his stories. But I
uh,
I don't think I've ever read Gore. But
I read the first
yeah,
couple of ones and then it's like, okay, I know where this goes from here on, and I can stop here.
I think it's the um. This is another example of uh. It becomes pornographic in this case in a literal sense, but I guess it would also be pornographic in action scenes that go on for too long, right?
Mm,
With Howard's stories, sort of it's very sort of like primal. Action scenes are quick, there's sudden reversals,
yeah.
unexpected novelties. Some guy throws a spider, or he has some grave dust from a Stygian tomb. It's very quick, right? It really
Mhm.
a good action scene doesn't need to be very long.
Oh yeah, I mean,
But
their entire fights is just one paragraph, and that's it.
right. And in the same way, you can have a sort of like eroticism. And you see this also with Clark Ashton Smith, right?
Oh
You've
yeah,
also
yeah,
read it,
yeah. He's
right?
one of my
Uh,
favorites.
yeah, great.
Yeah, I'm
Fantastic
actually
author.
thinking of probably for my yearly Halloween special, I'll probably go back into the Smith pool, maybe do Return of the Sorcerer or something like that for that one.
That's is that in uh, Atlantis? I'm trying to think. The one I'm trying to think which one
That's so
was
no,
that
that
with
one's
the
modern day.
steeds of. Oh yeah, okay, sorry, go
Now,
ahead.
yeah, that one is the Dark Eidolon. That one's a
Oh
good one
yeah.
too. But yeah, the Return of the Sorcerer is the one where the guy hires a sorcerer. He doesn't know it's a sorcerer at the time. Hires a guy to do translations from Arabic to English because he's having some trouble with this copy of the Necronomicon.
Oh,
And
of
it's like,
course.
yes, sorcerer may return to life even if chopped up into tiny little bits. And he's like, uh-oh. Let me tell you about my brother. Yeah.
But yeah, pretty good. No, I agree. Clark Ashton Smith is also great, but
Mm.
again, also you can write in a very sensual way,
Oh, he does. Yeah.
without having to be extremely sort of like self-indulgently pornographic about it. But there's a
Yeah.
sort of like sensuality that permeates his work
Oh, I
for
mean,
sure.
the language itself. I mean, you were talking like purple prose earlier, and how if you're not very good at it, it can feel overindulgent and just
Yeah,
improperly used. That guy nailed it. Like
yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
the guy was a poet before he became prose author for short stories and stuff like that, and you can tell because his stuff is just like lyrical as fuck. It's just beautifully written.
Lyrical, and it's his sort of antique choice of
Mm.
words, all this old English,
Yeah.
beautiful language, right? It sort of it helps to create this sense of like otherworldliness.
Yeah.
And even in the Byron Roberts Kalen Tor story, you have the same thing that you even if maybe some of these words, I mean these are words drawn from like hundreds and hundreds, like a huge span of history, right?
Yeah.
It's not trying to imitate any sort of like period, but it is a period that is not our own, right? So you are like in a way transported, which I guess a
Indeed.
lot
Yeah.
of Clark Ashton Smith stories are really about, like sort of
Yeah.
like pure escapism. It's
Exactly.
delightful.
Yeah. And that's the case for a lot of those Weird Tales guys. The way they wrote that particular focus on drawing you into that world through their use of language in many ways.
Yeah, I would say so.
Mm.
I guess nothing destroys that suspension of disbelief so much as just sort of like I guess a banal like contemporary English or something like that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, especially if it's used when it clashes with what's already there. Like,
Yeah.
like Lovecraft, for instance, would, had a bit less of that, a little bit less of that. He did go into the purple prosy kind of way of doing things as well.
Eldritch, squamous, gibbering horrors.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know,
this is
yeah.
great.
But also, a lot of his stuff is also like, almost ripped from the headlines because the way it's done is almost epistolary in many ways. Like the Call of Cthulhu is does a series of documents being collated
Oh yeah,
right together and stuff like that. And
yes.
often other things are just reminiscences or the discovered notes of a particular person describing their events. And it often has that feel, because back then that was fiction that was taking place in the modern day.
Right.
Exactly. And he combines that older kind of style of writing, that Victorian or Elizabethan kind of language, with the latest and greatest of modern technology and of his day of the 1920s and 30s, to really kind of bring the horror home, because that was one of the things that differentiates Lovecraftian horror from Gothic horror, which was very prominent at the time, is that idea of, this is happening now. This is your
Oh yeah.
world with the veil torn off, and you're looking at this ancient, horrid nightmare fuel beneath and underlying everything that you knew and everything that you are. Which, considering the guy's particular predilections and fears and phobias, I mean, yeah, this is one of those cases where having a lot of the author's own personal problems into his work really helped in that case.
Oh yeah, yeah. Don't bring up his cats. Yeah, but
Don't bring up the cat.
anyway, no. What I enjoy very I obviously also absolutely love H.P. Lovecraft. Actually, the Mound has had a big influence on my my current adventure that it will
What is
come
that
out
one
soon.
called?
I've called it a Slith Hive.
Slith Hive.
Yes, yes, very much so. But the what I was going to say is with Lovecraft, uh, it's again a lot of these documents are written in the modern in sort of like in this modern cosmopolitan style of like, and Dr. Eberts and the expedition to Antarctica, right? But then as soon as as soon as you actually get to the you go away from this sort of like this seeming mundane world, and usually the Necronomicon appears in almost every story to sort of like signal exactly when it's starting to get like weird and bizarre. Then he breaks out the appropriate verbiage, like the squamous, the rugose, the cyclopean masonry, the hideous non-Euclidean, and it's terrific. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, it definitely has its own kind of texture to it that
yes.
That's the thing about the best prose writers, create the texture of the story, the atmosphere, purely through their word choices in many ways.
I think so. I had a period when I was much younger when I read a lot of science fiction as well, when I would be able to sort of enjoy stories that maybe had characters that weren't like very well rounded, or even had like a writing style that wasn't the best, but just like the sheer strength of the ideas or the concepts would attract me. But I find that as I get older, that is more or less no longer the case, and then it's too easy to see like, oh, okay, it's really clunky. Okay, even if you can maybe peer through the language and see the idea behind it, but then it comes across as banal. I do find myself like, paying more attention to prose as I get older.
Yeah, it makes sense, because with good prose and good ideas, you have incredible stuff. With simple ideas and great prose, you have it's like that example I used earlier of the great chef taking simple ingredients and making something great out of it, versus something you got a great idea, but you didn't have the skill to really make it sing.
Sometimes that's all right. What's a good example? Well, actually, it's probably a terrible example. I don't know if you've ever read Philip K. Dick.
I have, yeah.
Philip K. I wouldn't call him like the most, like his prose isn't the most like scintillating or brilliant, but he's a great writer in some way. Like he manages to hit exactly the right like weird schizoid notes that are in like buried in everybody's head.
Exactly. It's not the same style of writing. Obviously, it's far more direct. It's far more, it's a bit more dry in terms of, its delivery. But the way he writes really brings to forth that sense of paranoia and, not sure what's going on kind of feel to it.
Yeah, I think so. You get something carried along in the neuroses of the main characters. Yeah.
Something like Ubik, or Flow My Tears, the policeman said, and stuff like that, where reality is starting to break down around the main character. And you're not sure whether they're not even sure whether what's happening is real or not. Or the three stigmata
of Palmer Eldritch, for sure.
Eldritch, stuff like that.
Reality is breaking down, but it's actually the presence of a divine being. Yeah, for sure. Recurring his elements.
Less bizarre ones, like, of course, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and other stories like that, where they're a bit more philosophical in that regard, less than pure mindfuckery. because you in the book there's never really that much of a doubt that Deckard isn't actually a robot or not, but it's very much about that dehumanization of yourself in order to do a job where you're hunting down creatures that aren't human but act human. And you get that more, it's a bit more like that philosophical exploration of the concept of what makes a person human versus what the heck is real and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. And even there, you have obviously excised from the very good adaptation, like the Blade Runner is a great movie, but the sort of there is a religious concept there as well, where everybody, but it's combined with like with modernity, so everybody hooks into this sort of like shared empathic vision of
Yeah,
some guy stumbling onto a hill and getting stoned. Great, yeah, fantastic stuff.
yeah, yeah. There's that. Plus, you have the what's it called, the kibble, or these vast expanses of radioactive slag that's left over of the last World War.
Yeah,
And there was far more of a like expansion of the idea of the electric sheep, the animals, most animals now being relegated solely to
everything is
robotic.
technology, right? Yeah, everything is like unreal in a way, and like people are still sort of striving for some sort of like human connection. Yeah, in
Yeah,
this horrible
and
dying
the
world.
idea of
Yeah,
having
the
a
rocks.
real animal is just like oh my god. I mean, that's just and the
Yeah,
idea, and when it gets to the point where when one of the androids kills an animal, and it's like the most horrifying thing they can think of, even more so than killing a human.
it's the spider, right? Like even the when
Yeah,
they start torturing the spider. Yeah, that's when
yeah,
like one of the moments when you see, oh, okay, geez, like yeah, it really goes into like I guess it's sort of an exploration of like what it is to be like a human
yeah,
being. I guess
yeah.
what
In many
makes life
ways,
worth
the
living, right?
answer that Dick came up with was empathy. Was really one of
Right.
the main things.
Yeah, for
Like,
sure.
so then I guess of course the question is, Deckard has pretty much cut off his empathy in order to be able to be a Blade Runner, because he keeps shooting people who aren't human, so he can't really empathize with them. What
But
effects
in
did
a
that
way,
have on you?
what's so interesting about Decker is that he's like a loser, right? Like
Yeah,
he's
exactly.
kind of a deadbeat as well. Like there was this other bounty hunter who was who was actually the good guy. Like he's much more competent. Just like plugs them, and Decker he always fumbles basically,
Yeah.
except for near the end. So. Yeah, no, it was that's a great author as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a reason why people keep trying to adapt his work and doing better, sometimes good,
I
sometimes bad.
uh, so I think part of his work is just very difficult to properly capture, and
Mm,
that's even in an environment that would stimulate just like absolute the sort of like absolute creative freedom that you would have in printed science fiction in the what is it, the 50s or 70s or something like that, right? Would be hard to do. Some of the adaptations are all right, like Blade
mm.
Runner. I think is
Blade
still
Runner, yeah. A Scanner Darkly by
technological.
Richard Linklater is great.
This is the cell shaded one, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. The
That
one
one
with
is
Keanu
also
Reeves.
great.
Yeah,
Even I don't know if you've seen it, but Scanners is pretty fun.
yeah.
I can recommend Scanners as a sort of 80s B movie, science fiction B
Oh,
movie.
you mean
That's
Screamers?
sorry, it's Screamers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Scanners is David Cronenberg with the
Oh yeah,
psychics.
I've also seen Scanners.
Michael
I also love
Ironside.
that one. Yeah,
Oh
but
yeah,
yeah,
that
for
one's
sure.
great. People always keep shitting on the hero's acting. I forget the guy's name, but the guy who plays Cameron Vale, and they literally mention in the movie that he's had other people's voices in his head for so long he hasn't really
The,
been able to develop a sense of self. So it makes sense that he'd be a bit of a cipher. It's
I
like,
so this is one where you kind of like you figured out, guys, this guy can't act. The telepathy, it's he hasn't formed a personality. All right, let's run
that
with
is
that. Right?
possible as well. Yeah. I mean, Michael
It
Ironside steals the show in that movie.
Yeah, as Daryl
Daryl
Revick.
Revick.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And no, I mean,
Yeah.
as the protagonist feels very generic to begin with, right? Just
Mm,
some guy that they pluck from the street and sort of like weaponize to take care of this Revick character, and you kind of
mm.
experience this whole bizarre underground psionic world through his eyes, right? And
Yeah.
it's delightful. What a
I still can't believe they actually shot a fake head for a dog food and fake blood with a shotgun to make that head
yeah,
explode.
that's why it's so good, right? If it
Yeah,
was CGI, it would be boring. But
yeah,
here, oh no, this is the
yeah.
head explosion. It's a great rendition of psionic combat, if ever there was
Oh
one.
yeah, that final fight at the end between Vale and Revok, and they're just like literally destroying each other, like the veins popping, and
Yeah, and at the end, right? And it's not you don't see a lot of like flashy CGI or something. It's all sound effects and camera angles. And
yeah,
I think by the end he had survived, but he transferred his mind into some
into
other
Revok, yeah. He
yeah,
basically
yeah, yeah.
overrode him on the
Oh
bit where
yeah.
he's hacking into the computer via a landline, and
It
literally,
rocks.
yeah, it rocks. And then he literally blows it up from the other end to the point where the phone lines are on fire, and hand
Yeah.
the phone is melting in his hand, and the nearby gas station explodes from everything. It's like,
And
was this supposed to be like a sci-fi movie or an action flick? This is awesome.
I think it's billed
Made
as
in
like
Canada, by the
even
way.
horror sometimes, but
Oh well, exploding
uh
head.
well, yeah, but there's some sort of like wonder to at least I mean, again, some of my friends don't have this at all, but there's such wonder to like watching these films that are made on, well, usually shoestring budgets.
Mm,
And I you know what they would have been able to do is very limited compared to what they can do now, but the again, the ideas are very fresh, and like
yeah,
how they tackle it is just like with such like verve. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
Well, going back to Dickens Screamers, that movie we briefly mentioned before we went on the Scanners binge, like Peter
For sure.
Weller's great in that. I mean, fucking hell. I mean, he just like for a role that wouldn't necessarily require. He got some definite pathos, like in describing like how he got into this corporate war, and all
But
this shit
it's
he's had to deal with.
it's a what is it again? It's the 80s. You've got like a what do you call that? Like a month, like you text scrolls down the screen
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
hear
yeah. That initial,
synthesizers. The corporate wars.
yeah,
We've just been left here to die.
yeah. The new
They literally
economic
have to smoke anti-radiation
Asian
cigarettes.
cigarettes. Yeah, yeah. You got your Reds. Yeah, and they're just smoking
Yes.
cigarettes to keep the
What is it?
radiation from killing them. Yeah,
And there
yeah.
was
The
of course
new
the
economic bloc versus the former miners and scientists who were formed the alliance.
and it's great because it's two sides and they feel very distant. It feels like a conflict that's far away, but you're just
Yeah,
marooned on this
on the
planet
plate. And
somewhere in
here's the thing,
Alpha
because that's the
Centauri.
planet where it started. That
Yeah,
planet series is where the war started, and he was one of the guys who was there from the beginning. And then you realize over the course of the movie, like he gets yes, he gets a transmission from the Alliance Command saying we are working on some kind of peace treaty. We'll be able to get you guys home. And then it turns out playing spaceship crashes like, no, we found beryllium on another planet. The war's continuing. You guys have been the guy you talked to, he's been arrested 2 years ago.
oh yeah, they just
Yeah,
wrote him off. Yeah,
yeah. And
it's
so at
very
that point,
well
it's like,
done. Yeah.
fuck this. We are going over to the enemy base. We're going to have our own peace treaty. Screw all this. Only for the, screamers of the title to, cause problems, as it turns out, because holy crap, they've evolved. This is like,
It's
Terminator with buzz saws.
the knife is never sharp enough. Yeah, and it
Nope.
was a great flick for sure.
Yeah. Roy Dupuis, the guy who played one of the humanized
Is it oh,
screamers, the guy with
Roy
the tear.
Dupuis?
Oh,
Yeah,
Roy
the
Dupuis.
little
He's a
the
Quebec
tiered
actor. Yeah.
tier guys.
He
Okay,
was,
all right,
yeah,
nice.
he was nice and creepy in his own way, like licking the blade and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Yeah, he was just perfect as a guy who, yeah, you're not surprised when it turns out he's a killer robot,
But you
but
also
you could
don't expect it because
don't expect it. Yeah,
he's not circumspect at all. You just think this is some creep. There's
yeah,
no way a
exactly.
robot would act like so obviously deranged.
Yeah, and then you realize in the end when he's calling for help, and they mentioned earlier, like, yeah, one of the models, just like it's a soldier calling for
Second
help. The
variety,
second
yeah,
variety is just
well,
a soldier calling for
for
help,
sure.
and it's like, oh crap, no, don't go near him. Oh, dead.
So a little, I guess, spoiler for my new adventure, but like
Hmm.
that sort of concept of uh, enemies gradually adapting to your attacks, like again the screamers or the Borg, right? That's
Hmm.
something I've tried to do in Slith Hive. So the idea is that like as you fight the Slith are some sort of Lovecraftian hive creature, right? But like as you fight them, they will, I've made these mechanics so that they adapt to your attack
Nice.
pattern, so they become less effective and sometimes even immune.
Yeah, or they develop countermeasures and start, okay,
Exactly.
they have been doing this all the time. This is how we get past them and deal some serious damage before them
Yeah,
notice
for
it.
sure. Oh yeah.
Nice. So when can we expect to see that one? Is it currently in development?
It is actually I've been playtesting it for a while, and it is with my editor for the last round. I was going to release it a bit sooner, but my editor very correctly, since I'm going to do it under under that label, he sort of bullied me into re-editing everything. So it flows a little bit more smoothly now. Probably um, in about a week or two, I'll have a final version, and then we'll figure out like some sort of way for it to be released. Um, we'll probably be putting it out as a separate publication, but for people that don't have the money or would rather just wait, you can always check out. It will be in No Art Punk 3 as well. I've entered my own contest, so
that should be interesting. Well, you can be like a out of competition entry if you want to.
I was actually considering that I would enter, and then I would after because this year we have far more prizes than the last year. I would enter, and then I would announce myself to be the victor, and then I would go to the Bahamas or something, or to France, and I would just make pictures of myself reading the first edition Paul Anderson, The Broken Sword, while I have a bottle of wine. I'll be sipping that down. I'll be reading some DMR, and I'll just be posting pictures of myself,
gigantic champagne glass.
Basically, yeah. Yeah. But but yeah, it will be coming out pretty soon, and I guess one of the goals there was to sort of like, I guess, to sort of illustrate how how great high level gaming can be. There's a bunch of premates in there. Everybody's level 14 and up, and kitted out, and hopefully the adventure is dangerous enough so that even then you'll be challenged severely.
Excellent. So the publishers, the Merciless Merchants, who have also done the publications for your other adventures, Red Prophet Rises and the Palace of Unquiet Repose, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah, and they publish tons of other good adventures as well. Again, Aaron himself writes pretty good ones as well. There's Tar Pits of the Bone Toilers, and there's another one, Peril in Oldenwood, by a guy called Ray Chandler, who's also pretty great. Yeah,
nice. So all these things are available on DriveThruRPG. The link, of course, is going to be in the description. There's a lot of stuff. I'm looking at it right now, so there's quite a bit of stuff here.
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of stuff to check out for various different systems. Of course, AD&D, OSRIC. There's the DCC version, of course, of Palette of Unquiet Repose, which is I'm always recommending because I love DCC for what it does. It's just like perfect for that kind of crazy balls to the wall. What the hell's going to happen next kind of feel to it.
Oh yeah, cool. DCC. I had a name for it. I always call it like Super Dungeons and Dragons. It feels a little like hypercharged, but it's good because even the Appendix N, sort of like the fantastic roots, have also been hypercharged. It's like everything is just like done to the max. You've got your whatever this crazy ass spell burning rule where you can
just the spells themselves. The fact that there's these huge tables of effects that you can end up with like even first level, basic spells can do incredibly insane stuff if you juice them up enough, which is really fun.
It was pretty difficult to I'm used to just coming up with like one spell effect, and now if you want to make one new spell for DCC, you have to get the whole table done.
Well, it does force you to not get too many spells, I guess, which is an advantage in and of itself, but having like one spell that can cover a certain range of effects and abilities, it also keeps you from having like this is this spell at first level, this is the same spell but it's at third level and it's a little bit tougher.
That's third edition.
It avoids that particular issue.
But sometimes you have some spells, they come into existence as a solution for a very particular problem, right? Like say, what is it, Tensor's floating disk or something like that, right? Like very clearly, you start taking that spell to get more carrying capacity. That I don't know if making 15 different varieties of tensors floating disk, where like, oh, if you boost it up to like whatever 30,
Yeah.
now you can carry whatever 50 tons or something like that. It doesn't quite
Versus
have the
just yeah,
same.
versus just using that one
Yeah,
spell more creatively, like using it as a way of getting across a large chasm or something like that. Or
yeah. Obviously, it can very often scale. Just find some way to like scale it up. But like, what is it with Wizard Lock? Oh, you can lock 10 doors, or they're
yeah,
super locked. Yeah, you can usually come
yeah,
up with something. Yeah.
yeah. It's locked, and now if you try to pick the lock, it bites you.
But for example, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
yeah. Or this kind of thing, like it's locked, but now it's not just locked with a key; it's locked with an arbitrary concept that you now have to discuss with it in order to convince it to unlock.
That's pretty good, like a classic riddling door. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, and that ties it back to philosophy. You see, that's when the DM goes, "Yes, das Ding an sich." Now,
Yeah.
throws out DCC, puts on Immanuel Kant. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Well, he was a real
Heck yeah.
pissant who was very rarely stable.
Hell yeah. A lot of philosophers are, I find. Yeah,
It comes with the territory, I think.
for sure.
You either discover the joys of your particular philosophy or the joys of booze or both, but something must be discovered.
Yeah, it's I guess digging too much into the origins of your own thought is not probably not healthy in a
Does that
way.
mean that philosophers are the dwarves of the humanities? They dig too deep.
Uh, well, that's difficult. I would ask Gary, but he's dead.
Yeah. Where's my Necronomicon? Yeah. Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything we wanted to talk about. Is there anything else that you feel we have not covered that you'd like to bring up? Is there anything that you are doing
Ooh,
that?
let's think. The moon landing being fake? No, 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 no.
Well, not
Geez.
all of them,
Oh boy, boy.
just the middle ones. They
I
went to
kid, I kid.
Venus
No,
instead to bang all the
we,
Venusian chicks.
exactly. Yeah, no, I'm trying to think if there's like any particular topic that I really wanted to get into. I guess I don't know how much time you have left, right? Like, but there was like something that uh kind of triggered me, and I mean in a positive way. Like
Okay.
you guys discussed sort of ways to make Dungeons and Dragons more sword and sorcery ish,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was very interesting, and it is something that I feel, Morten Bratton, Thalsa, he does very well. It's like that
Oh
atmospheric
yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
yeah.
stuff. But I did have the idea that like if you're going to do that with D&D, that you are going to like again run into certain assumptions of the system, and that's
No, that's
fine. But
definitely
you do have
true.
to be aware of those, right?
Yeah, that's one thing I liked about his Player's Guide to the World of Zoth that I covered
Mhm.
is the fact that it does take those things into account. These spells do
Right.
not exist. Healing mechanics work this way. They do not work, in other ways and that normally they would work. And the different materials are available, the different equipment that's available, classes that are available. He's done a good job with that, taking first Pathfinder back of the original version and now 5e and really reworking it to make it work for what he wants. It reminds me a bit what was done with the Mongoose did with the Conan D20 system,
Right.
which honestly is one of the better versions of the Conan RPG. I've the D20 system that I've seen previously, because it is laser focused on that setting in this particular genre in this particular way of doing it while still being third edition or 3.5 depending on your view of things, while being different enough that it feels different in play but still being understandable to someone who's only ever played third edition.
Um, I think I also think I read the player's guide as well, right? I think he did a good job.
Mm.
I do have some. I probably with 5e actually it's fine. You'll get if you start stripping out a lot of healing magic, that does tend to like sort of like alter the game in
Yeah,
ways that are not always foreseen. Like for
yeah, you
example,
need
like
to
if
be
you
able
would
to bring something else in there to help.
right, like say you start dungeon delving, and you take a lot of damage. Normally, the assumption of the game is that like, well, okay, no problem. You've got what is it, an eighth level cleric or something. You can just patch that stuff right up.
Yeah. Whereas in this case,
Instead,
the
you have
cultist class, which is the nearest equivalent, requires blood
yeah,
sacrifice in order to heal you. So
right. Not always convenient, right?
no, not really.
So stuff like
Where are
that, and
my
I ran into this.
slaves?
I ran into this myself, and I tried I played Carcosa for a while, which is this sort of like a
Oh yeah, I got
Lovecraftian
it
sort of planet.
right there.
Oh, you
That's
don't even
there it
know.
is.
Okay, all right. That's very well. I'll take your word for it. No, right. Playing that as well, it it does force you to sort of like, I guess it makes you aware of like a lot of like assumptions that are in the game, and
Mhm.
you can usually you can bend the game pretty far, but you'll have to account for it like in some way,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the magic in that game, unless you're only doing stuff that makes bad things go away, be prepared to cross some moral lines whenever you cast a spell.
Oh yeah, that oh the icky rituals, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
also like very dangerous. The these rituals with me, like this ended up being used by NPC sorcerers more
Yeah,
often
of
than
course.
not, and I ended up making sort of, I guess, a random table of abilities for the sorcerer class to sort of give you something to do. So some
Mhm.
minor like psionic adjacent abilities and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, there are psionic abilities in the
Oh yeah.
game themselves, of course, plus a whole plethora of laser guns and various,
Yes.
sci-fi Kirby tech sci-fi weapons, which are fairly effective against most Cthulhu-esque horrors, which is always good.
Yeah, it's almost like you get rid of a bunch of class features, and you can probably have more or less a game that plays very similar if you sort of reintroduce those class features as items in the game,
Yeah.
right? Or as disposables and that sort of stuff. That's
Yeah.
usually a way to go about
It,
it.
it's like you were saying how, universal systems don't necessarily work very well because they have inbuilt assumptions as to what they are capable of handling. So not all genres can be done appropriately. The same thing goes for D&D or, in any of its forms. You're going to have to make changes to the system in order to accommodate certain genres and certain settings, if
I think
not,
so. Yeah.
not necessarily extensive ones. I mean, the closer it is to the default D&D setting, the less changes you're going to need. But for something like proper sword and sorcery, or something like a historical setting, there's those, remember those old AD&D green books, the
Oh yeah.
historical
Yeah.
ones?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you go for something like the Renaissance one, where it's like the Age of Sail, and everybody's got guns, and
Uh, a mighty fortress, maybe
a Mighty Fortress. That was the one.
for
Yeah,
sure.
you go with that one. There ain't no healing magic because there ain't no magic.
They.
If you're doing a
Oh
purely
yeah.
historical setting, of course, this is what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, if you would use it for like a pure historical setting, I think the game you would be better served with some sort of game that would be like set up from the ground to sort of offer a very like rich um, play experience, even though
Mm-hmm.
you don't have any magic in
Yeah,
particular,
I'd
right?
probably go for something like maybe like the Chaosium Basic RPG that was used for Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green, and
RuneQuest, I think
yeah,
so as well. Yeah.
Rune Quest, the sixth edition Rune Quest, or the Mythros, that you can call it, is one of
Yep.
my number one RPGs to play. One, it's great for sword and sorcery. Two, the system works for also historical kind of medieval that era. No problems there. And even if you just have like magic, like just folk magic, in the sense of like, here are the kind of things that people believed actually worked back then. Because
Yeah,
they've
for
also
sure.
come up with a number of books for historical periods, Mythic Rome, Mythic Babylon, and stuff like that, which are really good reads too. Very well researched in terms of like the historical content.
For sure. The Yeah, I think that would probably that game is probably a little bit better set up for to offer you sort of like a rich play experience, even though you don't have any spellcasters. Whereas I feel if you could probably get D&D in a if you put D&D in a purely historical mold, you're going to start thinking like, well, what is it's like you're driving a car with a missing wheel, like, or just
Yeah,
no, it's always been like that. Don't worry, right? And there's ways to sort of I guess compensate for that. I would probably, if I would play a purely historical game, I would start delving into like maybe more combat options for fighters, but right, it
yeah,
takes a considerable amount of effort to sort of um, to get over that deficiency, I think.
yeah. And that effort would probably be better spent learning just a different system.
Uh, in some cases, yeah. I will
Mhm.
say D&D is probably pretty good for a whole host of other like sort of I guess a lot of pulp fiction actually works
Mhm.
probably pretty well with it.
Yeah, like a high level character in D&D does act in terms of, they're at least in certain editions of D&D, the ones that don't go too super heroic is very much like, a pulp character from those old stories in many ways.
I mean, if you're talking about super heroic, if you have whatever 10 magic items each, you are absolutely acting super heroic, and it's
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful. I love it. I can recommend it. You scout a dungeon with wizard eye. You teleport in. You've got a cube of force. You throw your hammer around. It's actually pretty great.
Sword catches fire and just like
basically, yeah, and it feels like you're like, you can do anything, and you have all these options at all times. But then a good adventure, right? Like it also like it challenges you to. It's always putting pressure on you, right? In a way, so that probably if you die, it'll be because you forgot some sort of countermeasure that you may have had, or some sort of option, rather than that you're just
or something that you
down.
overlooked in your initial recon or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is always the limits of any kind of, rule set, is that it covers the things it covers. It doesn't cover everything. You just have to use the right tool for the right job.
Yeah. I think so. I guess that brings us back to sort of like, I guess, ACKS and AD&D, that these two pillars that are very similar in the overall landscape of old school gaming, but there is like a sort of like a crucial difference there, where you go completely comprehensive versus very broad and granular.
Yeah,
but
tightly
like definitely
fitted
with a lot
versus loose but functional.
For sure, yeah.
The M16 versus the AK, basically.
I'll take your word for it. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Canadian. I don't have either. So
okay, all right.
But it is a bit of that. There's always that, certain systems have a bit more give than others, but in many cases, it's more a question of personal taste in that regard. If both systems and that we're discussing are equally as well designed,
I think so. Yeah. People have.
After that, it's just a question of taste, really.
Yeah, people have a sort of preference, I guess, or a sort of like a way in which they process information that'll will guide those predilections towards one or the other, for sure.
Exactly. Well, my predilections are to check out the Age of Dusk blog,
to
check out your reviews, and keep an eye on those announcements for basically the next No Art Punk compilation and your next adventures coming out. Your blog is princeofnothingblogs.wordpress.com. The link will be
very
in the
sexy link. I know. Yes.
Yeah, I've seen much worse. Trust me about that.
Absolutely.
Prince, it has been an excellent time talking to you. I've been very happy to do so, and I'm very glad you accepted to come on the show.
Oh, my pleasure, Bastien.
No, my pleasure as well. To everybody else, go check. I always get mixed up when because my monitor's backwards here. Go check out this guy's stuff. Go check out his reviews. Go check out his adventures. They are very well worth taking a look at. And I will see you next time with more stuff on this channel. Until next time, from both of us, adios.
Until next time.